That voice.
Apologies for the delay there. I was stopped by my father who wanted to show me a short video about platypus, the platypus, and all of the
Not
odd.
not his platypus, I would hope.
No, would you not own no
You don't own
platypi,
any I don't know
no
what accent I'm doing.
platypuses.
You don't own any euphemisms. Good.
Um, yeah, that's pretty freaking weird. Maybe I'll put the little clip here if he I'll get him to send it to me.
The platypus is probably the weirdest animal that exists on Earth. It's like a duck mixed with a beaver with an otter's feet. They're also a mammal that lays eggs. And they're venomous, which is also weird for a mammal. And the way their venom works is wild. It's found in their back legs. And basically they just kick you and drive their spurs into you, which injects the venom. And scientists pretty much know nothing about their venom. There's no cures to it. And get this, when they jump in water, their eyes and their ears shut down. So they're pretty much deaf and blind. But it's cool because they can connect to the electromagnetic field of any creature, so they can hunt creatures by detecting their electrical pulses. Call me crazy, but that's a superpower. They also have no teeth, so when they need to chew, they just throw rocks in their mouth to grind up their food. And I don't know where the food goes because they also don't have a stomach. Oh, and they also don't have nipples, but they have milk. It just comes out of their armpits. Moral of the story, if you ever feel weird like you're an oddball, just remember, the platypus exists.
Yeah.
Sweet.
I had something else, but I forgot. I was
You
distracted.
said you had 10 different things.
Yeah, that was just
Yeah.
speaking colloquially or whatever.
In tongues.
Yeah. Oh yes, I was going to tell you about the milk. I I was kind of like, I wonder if he'll ask me about it, but now I'm just going to tell you about it. This is.
Mhm.
Have you ever heard of Have you ever? Do you know anything about raw milk?
I know that the pasteurization process takes away or kills certain things, but I don't know the full extent. I also have a really good friend of mine who was a nutrition, or he has a master's in nutrition. He was thinking about being a nutritionist, and he said probably the single most important thing that you can do to maintain a healthy diet that's different than the mainstream is to drink milk from grass-fed cows instead of your typical milk. So
Yeah.
I don't know much more other than I trust his judgment on unique things like that.
Okay.
Uh, mhm,
Yeah. Yeah. I learned about it from this guy Giannis West,
mhm.
who I was made aware of through Griffin's work.
I do recommend animal products. I do recommend milk a lot. But if you go to the store and just buy ultra pasteurized milk, a lot of people can't really tolerate that. So that's not what I want people to go out and do. I really want people to get educated about raw milk, how you find it, why it's so good, and basically there's all these nutrients we get from raw milk that we just can't get from standard milk. What they tell you is that that pasteurized milk is still filled with all the vitamins and minerals in there, and that's actually true. But what the pasteurization does is it destroys all the enzymes and the microbes that is supposed to take those nutrients and turn into nutrition in your body. So a lot of the nutrition in the store-bought milk, while it's in there, your body can't absorb it. So it's basically useless, and a lot of people can't digest it at all in their stomach, so they get like lactose intolerance symptom. And that's not really that they are intolerant to the lactose, it's because natural milk has lactase enzymes, which is supposed to digest the lactose naturally in the milk. That's what raw milk has, that's why we can just drink it. And people who think they're lactose intolerant, if they drink raw milk, they're going to get milk that already has lactase enzymes in it to digest the lactose, and they're not going to have any issues. So a big part of why milk today is seen as this like big allergenic food is because people have been sort of scammed into drinking dead pasteurized milk that just can't be digested. It doesn't have any enzymes. It's basically kind of dead milk, and they can't absorb it, and they get stomach pains and stuff like that. Raw milk.
I tried it out, and I've been loving it for like months now, and it's just you know, there's been times where I won't have access, or I'll just like forget to go to the grocery store because there's like a limited amount, and people will buy, it'll sell out quickly and stuff, and
I was hoping you lived in one of those towns that's like 1950s where you have a milkman who comes to your door and he's
that's
like,
the goal.
"Good day, mate.
That's
Hope
what
you're
I'm
doing
trying.
well with your
Yeah,
milk."
that's what I'm trying to do, man. Like that's what's up. I'm basically, find the local farmers. I'm saying, You know,
A growing number of Connecticut dairy farms are resurrecting the concept of the old-fashioned milkman. They're offering the convenience of ordering online and the freshness of cow-to-doorstep delivery.
I had no idea about this, but one dairy farm in Ellington is offering one thing more. NBC Connecticut's Ted Copy introduces us to the modern milkman.
Every box is different, so if someone wants milk, eggs, and butter one week, and they want cheese and yogurt the next week, they can do that.
Seth Baylor from Ellington didn't have to go far to reinvent himself. He's a fifth-generation dairy farmer who now calls himself the modern milkman. It's delivery day, and just 4 weeks in, they're packing 125 boxes at the family's Oak Ridge Dairy.
If I want chocolate milk this week and yogurt this week, and I want to add a cookie of the weekend.
And a day after ordering on the app, it's dropped off at your doorstep, a concept that seemed to have disappeared decades ago.
A lot of people in the community started asking, can we buy our milk? And we're just looking at different ways to diversify and thinking about how are people buying online.
Baylor's partnered with several local dairies and a bakery as the once quaint idea of connecting consumers with local farmers makes a comeback. But what may be even more unique is his vision of connecting consumers with people in need.
Simple as that. Simple as that.
If on any day a customer doesn't need or can't use their delivery, or if they just want to share, their Farm Fresh box goes here to the Hockanum Valley Community Food Bank.
I just text that number, donate. They'll say, thank you, your current order schedule for next week is donated.
Pantries historically have had a lot of canned goods.
CEO David O'Rourke says a farm-to-pantry delivery is exactly what they need.
But one of the things that clients want to know is how long do they have from the time they get it from us to utilize it when they get home. And sometimes when we get dairy products that have the shelf life of only maybe another day, then we know that the likelihood of it being utilized is so much less than it is getting it fresh.
We've created a platform to bring in other local products like eggs, butter, cheese, yogurt.
And if it all works and expands to additional towns, they may have to get even more cows to keep up with the demand. In Ellington, Ted Copy, NBC Connecticut News.
And here's a little something you may like if you want to avoid those long lines at the grocery store before a storm. The modern milkman also plans to offer what they call the Blizzard Box.
The Blizzard Box.
Milk, bread, and eggs delivered the day before we get into our Easter.
I think they're onto something.
They are.
you know, if you live in an area with local farmers, highly recommend. You know, it's just after nowadays, like it's like I almost crave it. Like it feels very nutritional, and also, you know, it's just helps. You know, it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you in I forgot which part of the country. I don't want to dox you or anything, but what I forgot what part of the country you're in. For some reason I was thinking like Pacific Northwest.
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm on the other side of the country, on the East Coast. I'm in like central Connecticut.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. I think I vaguely remember you mentioning that. I mean, there are farms in, like, I always think of Connecticut as tri-state area. It's all suburbs as far as the eye can see. But if you're in central Connecticut, you're probably not that far from farms in like New Hampshire, Vermont area, or even northern Connecticut.
Yeah, there's even some. Yeah, there's even some. You know, most of Connecticut is just kind of like you were saying. It's like rural suburbs with like farm type of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are places, and it's not like illegal here. Like you can sell it at grocery stores and stuff, which is pretty cool. But I know a lot of places it's like illegal, which is crazy. In my, you know, like I'll link to, or maybe put in a clip of that video I referenced.
Now, I think the most concerning thing in all of this is that the population seems to have lost their right to choose their own food. Sure, some technocrats in suits might tell you that drinking raw milk is no good for you, but how does that give them the right to decide what you put inside your body? Especially when it regards natural healthy foods that we as humans have consumed for all of history. Even if we acted like raw milk was actually dangerous, its widespread prohibition would still make no sense. Think about this. I could walk into a supermarket, buy a packet of meat, and eat all of it raw right there on the spot. Now, I don't agree with this, but to many people this would seem like bacterial suicide. But how am I allowed to consume raw meat and not raw milk? Should we have a raw meat prohibition also? Government agents coming into your house to check if your steak is cooked all the way through? The fact of the matter is that there simply are zero good reasons for why raw milk should be made illegal. It's a natural food, and like everything else natural, it's a product of how you treat it. Milk and meat from antibiotic-filled, factory-farmed feedlot animals is toxic. That should be self-evident.
But yeah, so that's my situation.
Cool.
To that.
No, I fully believe that there are certain things that just in that, like I think it also matters what a cow is digesting, like what their diet is that changes their gut biome, which changes their milk. I wonder if there's been any studies on what the mother is eating during those first 6 months of lactating after a baby gives birth, and how that affects the. So I know there have been studies that the baby receiving breast milk rather than formula results in, on average, a 5-point IQ increase in the child. So there's a question of how much is that the nutritional supplementation from the milk? Probably most of it, but there also might be a part of it that's pair bonding with the mother that's more effective. But anyway, there's all these things with milk that I think
the land of milk and honey.
Yeah. What was that?
The land of milk and honey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we left out the honey, but
yeah.
Hi, honey, I'm home.
I'm not asking this question like how important is it. I'm saying like it's a miracle that I can taste honey and that honey exists.
Yeah, I think there's stuff to be said about honey as well, actually, like in terms of all sorts of stuff. But it's also honey is obviously like a symbol for like, I'm not sure.
The sweetness, the fat and the sweet, I think, right? No?
I think that, yeah, I've also heard Peugeot say something about how like honey is.
So God says he's going to bring Israel into the land of milk and honey. And it's interesting to understand the land of milk and honey and to understand that, what are those images? Like, what does this represent? And so the land of milk and honey seems to represent something like that which is tame, the best of what is close, that is the pure, the tame animals that produce milk, or the mother that produces milk, the idea of something which is also in some ways for nourishing, and then the best of the wild, or the best of that which is barely connected. And so, but that is also extremely sweet, and that seems to be the honey. And so, because it's very, the idea of why honey is kosher in the laws is it's ambiguous, right? It's like there are a few of these types of foods which are a little ambiguous. And so if you want to understand the best image of the land of milk and honey, it really is an image of the deicist. And you see in Christianity, you have this image of Christ in the center with the Mother of God on his right hand and St. John the Foreigner on his left hand. And that really seems to be something of what is represented here, which is the best of the right hand, the best of the left hand, the best of that which is close and nourishing and, and pure, you could say, and then the best of that which is wild, because of course people would gather honey in the wild. They would gather it from, they didn't necessarily have honey the way that we have it now, that the best of that which is wild, and the best of the wild prophet in the desert wearing the garments of skin. And so you have these two extremes where God is saying this will be the land which is flowing of the best of the two sides of reality, you could say. And so that's, of course, a very interesting part of it.
I don't know exactly. I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay. Post in the comments below.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting.
That reminds me of the that website, the searchthislittlecorner.com.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's for anyone who doesn't know, there's a little website, and you can search like through not all, but some of the TLC channels. And I was thinking maybe searching honey, look for a clip to put in here. But I guess it's the person who's been hosting it is no longer looking to host it, and they're looking for someone else to do it. So if anyone is like open or willing or interested, like that would be cool, I think, because that's a good resource in my opinion. One more thing about the milk, though, before we.
You ever see a movie, The Aviator?
No.
Never. Okay, there's a scene. He's got a nervous tick. A famous businessman isolated himself in this theater. Come in with the milk. 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 You should totally clip that in post. Sorry.
Come in with the milk. 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 He has to open the bag.
That's an interesting thing, is that if people have conversations with me, if
Yeah.
they just like make a reference, something you're trying to like seed into my brain, then I have to go watch like an hour-long thing about it to see if there's a clip to put in. So you were talking about the breast milk, and that reminded me of another one of Giannis's. Giannis is from Denmark,
Mhm.
if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
And in one of his videos, and I've been meaning to talk with him because I've had textual, and I think we had a couple of calls, but it's been a long time. There's so many people I've been trying to talk with, but he another one of his videos is about a supplement which is derived from aloe vera.
Our story starts with aloe vera, the most noted healing plant. It's literally since in ancient medicine, you know, in all cultures around the world. In fact, it's mentioned 5 times in the Bible. It was talked about during the times of Alexander the Great.
There's this one particular chemical which is like.
Well, in 1985, they actually discovered what it was in aloe vera that was that active component, and it was a discovery of something called a polysaccharide, and they named it ace-mannan.
If I remember correctly, it's a particular type of sugar. And this sugar actually constitutes the little hairs on the outside of your cells, every single cell in your body. I'm pretty sure it's all the cells. And this is by the means by which cells catch contagion that's going by and like make sure it doesn't get in, basically. And also it's how they communicate with other cells.
Yeah.
And it's what those are made of. And I guess like it can be produced, but it's like very difficult to produce outside of this. Like,
these sugars are formed during the sun, during the last moments of ripening. Did you ever taste the difference between a banana that we buy here in the supermarket or a banana that has been ripened on the tree in the Caribbean, for example? It's so much better in taste, so much sweeter.
When you talk about a really good banana or a really good apple or a really good orange, you're now in the realm of ineffability.
Yes.
It's beyond words.
Yes, and the best you get is its name. It tastes like a banana.
Yeah,
that's what it tastes like. And then that's something, there's like this thing that we share where if you have the banana, you know, it's like, oh yeah, it does taste like a banana. Weird. And then it's like, but that's the connection. So like what we're saying here isn't just willy-nilly stupid stuff. This is like, no, this is the thing that we get to do, is we get to connect on a very deeper level with something as simple as a name.
And I would say you cannot understand something without initiation. It's like taste and see. So like, explain to me the taste of honey. I mean, you can try, and many people do, or the taste of a banana, but you really can't. You can point to other things, and this is where memory comes in. Memory is also predicated on experience. You don't have a memory of something that you haven't experienced or that you haven't participated in. So like a banana, what does a banana taste like? Well, it's like a tropical fruit. Well, what if you've never eaten a tropical fruit? It's like the higher ester notes within a Belgian beer. And what if somebody doesn't know what an ester is? You know, it's just this infinite regress of fractal experience and participation. You can't explain something to someone who's never tasted honey. You know, you have to be initiated into something to understand it. And anything works this way. Science works this way. Math works this way. Baking works this way. Parenting works this way. What's it like to raise a child? You know, you cannot know without some degree of initiation within the morphic field of the resonance of that relationship. That's kind of the way that I would say it.
So trying to keep my eyes and ears and my senses pointed towards experiences where, let's say God is trying to say something to me. I want to pay attention to that.
And it's found in human breast milk.
So when a woman becomes pregnant, she has the capacity to start converting high levels of glucose in her body into mannose. these exact structures. So it can go through the umbilical cord into the fetus, and once the baby is born, that transport happens through the mammary glands through breast milk. But it's just fascinating.
And aloe vera, but people haven't been able to figure out how to extract from the aloe vera because usually it goes bad very quickly. But this guy figured it out, and he refined it and made this stuff. So that's the spiel, and yeah, that's kind of interesting with regard to breast milk. That's basically what, yeah, the reference that came to mind. Yeah, which is that like there's something about, because if you notice mothers who have like autoimmune diseases and stuff, um, I think I'm butchering some of the science here,
Yeah.
but there's like something that happens with mothers when they're I'm not sure. I think it's when they're lactating or when they're pregnant in general, which is that, you know, like their autoimmune conditions will go away and stuff like that. And
Once she's through breastfeeding the child, guess what? The symptoms typically come back.
yeah, it's very interesting stuff. And really just all this health stuff in general, you know, like we talk a lot of ideas in this corner.
What is it then that is coming from this corner?
You know, very 30,000-foot view is or whatever. You know,
Yeah.
but I think this you know, this health stuff is important, especially nowadays, you know?
Yeah, my default bias when it comes to that stuff is how like what were the typical living conditions for the typical let's say agricultural human versus hunter-gatherer human over the last 10,000 years. And
Yeah.
if there's anything where so bread is a really good example of this, where like if we're deviating from, let's say, the fundamental structure of bread from the last 10,000 years, we're probably doing something to both our bodies and probably our minds too, that we don't, you know, realize. Because yeah,
I feel like there's some wise analogy to the bread of life that could be made here.
or sourdough Neil, one or the other.
Yeah, deviating from the true bread or something.
Sourdough Neil has the true bread and he's Orthodox, so you should.
Dude, I haven't seen him around. I think he's a cool dude. I would love to see more of him. You know?
He's been on Chad's channel recently. I think his wife either just gave birth or is about to give birth, so he's got a lot of stuff going on in his household. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually just made a clip of your recent conversation with Chad.
I try to keep the really spicy stuff to Discord and leave it at that.
Yeah. I think you'll like it.
Cool. Thank you.
And it kind of fits with what we were saying about like you know, like health being a pertinent or relevant thing nowadays, you know, for combating the evil among us, you know. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's anything else you had about that. I know we kind of or if there was anything.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about coffee. This is mostly speculation, but like I feel like I'm a little, I definitely feel like I'm smarter when I'm either drinking coffee like right now, or like there's it's a performance enhancing drug for definitely. And I think of it that way. And I've also, like, I remember in college where I would have friends of mine who would pop in, like they would have not studied for a given test at all, and they would be like woefully unprepared, like maybe they didn't attend class, and then I would get so pissed because they would just pop an Adderall the night before, they'd study all night, and they would do just fine. And I was like, man, this is performance enhancing bullshit. Like I would not do the Adderall. But then again,
Pharmacon.
Yeah,
Pharmacon, right?
yeah.
Book of Enoch.
Yeah. But I've been thinking about coffee in relation to this in a civilizational context, because you had coffee really began to grow popular first in the Middle East, probably around 1500, like 14 to 1500, kind of like the high point of the Arab world. Like when the Ottoman Empire was expanding in all directions, they just conquered Constantinople. Like that's when coffee was exploding over the Arab, you know, the Arab world.
I can still hear you.
Oh, okay. And so I think about to what extent, like, and then coffee and tea, you know, you got the Dutch East India Company forming right after that. You had coffee and tea, which were like two of the major driving factors of European expansion
America
imperialism.
runs on Dunkin'.
Yeah, yeah, especially in Connecticut. Down where I am, it's more like Waffle House, but yeah, close enough. But I wonder, like, how much of our, like, the Enlightenment, scientific progress, all that stuff that came from the 1600s onward, especially around. So the poor, I don't think the poor classes could afford coffee and tea, but I think that was increasingly the case that even the poorer classes could by like the 1800s. But like how much of like the European Enlightenment is mostly an aristocratic thing in terms of the thinking and the art and all that.
Caffeine fueled.
Yeah, no, seriously. Like I
Really?
think about this, like the tea
Yeah.
houses and the coffee houses and
Yeah,
like
wasn't that a big, like with the French intellectuals, that was a big thing, right?
I think so. In Britain too, certainly. Yeah, so I wonder like how much of let's say the rise of Western civilization is due to something like coffee. And
Dude.
like so like is the equivalent in modern terms the Adderall and the microdosing of LSD? You know, like what's the equivalent?
Dude,
Like I
dude.
haven't, but okay, wait, hold on. Before we go there, I just want to say, like, I'm a skeptic on the microdosing of LSD. I'm really a skeptic on that because I don't feel like, especially in the last like 10 years or so where that was popular, I don't feel like our culture is more creative than we were, say, in like the 1960s. So like the full dose of LSD, okay, but the whole microdose.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
just opened
No,
up like a
dude,
huge
great.
can of
No,
worms.
this is great. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was anything like that you were like that we, we had kind of made half plans to like maybe talk about some other stuff. Maybe it'll bridge there, but or maybe we can just kind of put that on pause for later or another time or
Yeah.
something. Okay, like
Whatever you want to go.
I think this is very fascinating thing, and yeah, first of all, I think you're correct with regards to the microdosing thing.
We offer Nobel Prizes every year to, scientists that figure out some tiny corner of the mechanism that our incredibly intelligent bodies use to heal themselves, right? I mean, it's like there's a deep, deep mystery there. And that's what I think of when I say the term inner healing intelligence. I'm talking about the deep organic intelligence that is embedded in all of nature that expresses itself through this evident sort of purposive teleological way. And so, humility in the face of that.
I think it's maybe that it could be a good thing.
Those forces within ourselves, those very real, although non-physical, psychic, psychospiritual forces that can heal a person from a trauma. We're there to essentially optimize the conditions for that to happen.
I'm really just skeptical about it because of the fact that it leans towards this whole medicalization, pharmaceuticalization of psychedelics, which is like not cool.
All the way to companies that are trying to create a non-psychedelic psychedelic and just sort of reinstantiate this idea that we're just brains with chemicals that need to be adjusted when we're not functioning properly. That sort of reductionist mechanistic view of who we are and how we operate, which I think has failed conventional psychiatry for the last 50 or 60 years. We see why, to my mind, the reason why we've been iterating on this sort of biological psychiatry model for 50 years and seeing only escalating rates of mental illness and addiction and suicide, it's because the paradigm isn't complete. It doesn't work. You can't just treat people like a sack of chemicals or a brain that has knobs that can be twiddled and fix people that way. It's when people have symptoms, those are signals from an intelligent system that are trying to communicate to the being at large, the human, that there's some intrinsic psycho-spiritual wound that remains unhealed. And so to silence those symptoms with something like an antidepressant or anti-anxiety medicine, that might be a vital and life-saving temporizing measure, but it's not a sufficient measure on its own. And so that's what has led the field astray in my mind. And so we're shifting into a very different paradigm with these substances, these psychedelics, which are intended not to suppress symptoms, because people aren't intended to take them every day and to suppress the symptoms in that way. We're using them in a very judicious, small number of circumstances to actually intensify one's access to the wound that is generating the symptoms to begin with. And we absolutely want to see symptom improvement as a byproduct of that. But when that's the the beginning and end of the approach, symptom elimination, is when people just aren't being actually helped over the long term. So I worry that if we take an overly reductionist or try and shoehorn psychedelic treatments into that paradigm, which needs to be obsolesced, that we're just going to create more harm and or squander a real opportunity to help people.
Like there was just this MAPS thing that just happened.
Yeah, also trying to keep up with the fast pace of the developments in the field of psychedelic studies, which will be our topic for today. There was a very surprising decision by the FDA last week, I guess, or over the weekend, denying MAPS, or the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, Lycos, the ability to administer MDMA for PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
The data seem to be pretty good for treatments of PTSD, which is notoriously treatment resistant. I mean, there are some things that make a dent, but this was just blowing other treatments out of the water, so it seemed. But there are so many confounding factors in the study of psychedelics, and in the attempt to medicalize them, it seems that the FDA was not well positioned to evaluate the therapeutic component. And also there was some activist resistance to this particular, at least, medicalization pathway. And so, now I think a lot of people in this field are scrambling to figure out what comes next.
The idea that like it's, a symptomatic relief type of situation, like that's not what psychedelics are about, in my opinion.
Psychospiritual forces can heal a person from a trauma. And then on the other hand, I worry that, some therapy cults could form because, as we know, psychedelics, it's not a secret or an illusion that psychedelics can increase suggestibility and vulnerability to people. And that has been abused by...
Yeah, therapy cults are straight up religious cults. Like, yeah, for sure, that's a risk.
Right. So that's a super important thing for us to acknowledge.
And, yeah, so... but building off the psychedelic point briefly is that I really think there's an analogy with what you're saying, talking about our modern times. I think our modern times are strongly defined by the 60s countercultural movements, and again, when I say that, I think a part of that as well is the stigma that's been created about drugs in general. And the whole anti-war movement was really beat down, and the hippie movement and stuff was because the powers that be didn't like people protesting the war. It's the military-industrial complex per usual, just pulling the strings and casting things to be something different than they are. So then, yeah, that's part of it as well. And I think, that, but really just the whole time period, and particularly the introduction of like psychedelics into the culture, that was, I think, a huge thing. And also, speaking nowadays, I think nicotine is a huge talking point in this respect. And also, like obviously weed has become pretty much legalized, and there's much that could be said about that, like in both a positive and negative respect, in my opinion, kind of similar to what I was saying about medicalization, but slightly different. And yeah, as somebody who's been addicted to nicotine for many years, overall, I definitely think it's a no good thing. However, I can't deny that there's definitely something about it which is performance enhancing, if that can be performance enhancing. And I think it's really the same with any substance. I think it's just a matter of how we use it. Even like fentanyl and stuff, I think maybe there's a application in a hospital where it might be appropriate. And like cocaine used to be a a medical thing that they would use during surgeries or something. I don't remember, but it's all crazy. It's just the whole topic of in general about pharmacon is just, I think, a very it's crazy how we just don't talk about it at all. And but it's such a huge thing, huge. It's like our whole culture. I would say it's a defining feature because in my mind, I don't mean to show my personal worldview or anything, but in my mind, I connect it with the Luciferic in general, and I think about, and you don't even have to like be, you know, quite so new age in a hopefully dignified way as myself to say that, like approaching the, there's a something of a rising Luciferic spirit, right?
Now everything which had previously skewed vertical began to slant horizontal. The church up to then had been a monolith, but the Reformation caused a fragmentation which turned Christendom into a divided multiplicity. As the age went on, religion lost even more ground to a large number of secular philosophies, ideologies, and the academy more broadly. Where there had once been one authority which reached all the way to heaven, there were now thousands of authorities, literally speaking different languages, inventing their own jargon and category systems. This is now known to us as the Enlightenment, which was contrasted with the Dark Ages. Increasingly, the systems which defined reality were scientific rather than religious. Religion understands the world in terms of values, ideals, and meaning. Science understands it in terms of objects, processes, and measurements. No data is intrinsically more significant than any other data. Value itself was reduced from a matter of fact to one of opinion. Where religion had classified reality by setting up categorical boundaries, science and philosophy connected it by examining the spaces between. Scientific advancement resulted in rapid technological development and made possible imperial expansion. European nations began building empires, moving outward and very nearly spreading across the entire planet. With all of this came advances in industry, which increased social mobility. Thus, the old class systems began to break down. Monarchy by stages morphed into popular democracy, first through documents like the Magna Carta, and later with those like the US Constitution. Power which had been concentrated in a few, slowly spread out among the many. Serfdom and slavery were abolished. There came a revolutionary idea that all people are created equal. Equality became the ruling religious idea of the millennium. How interesting. And the minus symbol, which lowers and negates, is this. Was it not Mephistopheles who said, "I am the spirit that negates"? And the division symbol is this. The symbol represents a fraction. And in a fraction, the number which is below the horizontal takes apart the one above it, dividing it into equal groups. It's a mathematical operation very evocative of the revolutionary myth. And during this time, several popular revolutions took place. Notice the revolutionary spirit is inherently lateral. If this is a hierarchy, and this is usually how hierarchies are depicted, then a revolution is when the horizontal attacks the vertical and wins. The scientistic cosmogony betrays this same horizontality. The earlier Christian creation story is of God creating the universe. The scientistic inversion is the story of emergence, whereby higher forms emerge out of lower ones. That is, bottom up. The horizontal creating the vertical.
There's a something of a rising Luciferic spirit, right? And I think Lucifer, there's connections with the Book of Enoch and Azazel.
A fallen angel depicted in the Book of Enoch. Lovecraft mentions Azazel by name in the Dunwich Horror. Azazel was one of the leaders of the angels called the Watchers, accused by Enoch of giving humanity knowledge of weapons and ornamentation. The Book of Enoch reads, Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. The whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. Bearing in mind this latter assertion, it is interesting to note that Azazel was associated with the rite of the scapegoat, which was mentioned before. And just like the scapegoat, it is Azazel who is blamed for the sins of human beings. At the command of God, the archangel Raphael was sent to bind him hand and foot, to cast him into an opening in the rough and jagged rocks, where he is to abide in darkness until the coming of the day of judgment. The Enochian account is describing a figure very reminiscent of the Titan Prometheus, who, after giving fire to humanity, was punished by Zeus and bound to a rock. The pagans held Prometheus in high regard. His name comes from the Greek word for forethought. It was even said that humanity was fashioned by Prometheus. By contrast, the Book of Enoch vehemently despises the angel Azazel, who is to be cast into the fire at Judgment Day. Once again, we find a story with two faces.
And giving Prometheus, giving, and this goes with the whole idea of science and the personal will and like gnosis, and that is, very much pharmacon, like the Book of Enoch, giving the powers to humanity, to the technologies.
The garments of skin, or like the old word for this is pharmacon, right? The thing that like it's death, but also you can use it to ward off death, right? That's what was where we get our word pharmaceutical from.
And Peugeot was talked about another one. I forget what book, but there's another one where it was actually the book. I think the Archangel Gabriel or Raphael who gave it to humanity. Like the Book of Tobit.
The idea that in Jubilees that Gabriel would reveal
Raphael, but yes.
Sorry, that Raphael would reveal this again to Noah, the more pharmacon aspect of it, which was part of the Enoch tradition. It makes a lot of sense.
In the Book of Tobit, this is exactly what the Archangel Raphael does. Is he comes to Tobit and actually helps him overcome the wiles of the demons by doing things that. Part of the reason that Luther didn't like Tobit is because he felt like it was too magical. Like there's too many things that are like magic. Is like, oh, you're gonna go catch the certain fish and do the certain thing with it, and then you'll make some incense, and the incense will drive the demon away, and things like this. And that really, like, when they're trying to like purge all the superstition, from the world or whatever, like Tobit has to go. But I mean, that's the thing that Raphael does. That's what Raphael does. Like, he's a healer, but he's more than just a healer. He basically shows the way that the demon works, and then gives you a way to counteract it. So, yeah. So
everything that's happening today, it's been talked about in our tradition. It's just we just need to know how to look for it, and also to be able to let's say understand it. And
so yeah, it's all very interesting, and I think I had something else there.
No, you opened like 3 different doors that I'm interested in going down. So
Yeah.
I was taking notes.
Yeah, basically I'm thinking, we have to like, oh yeah, I was saying even like to use in a loving I say it jokingly, but part of me with no vengeance in my heart, I promise. Even normie Christians, can and I don't think of you as a normie Christian, Neil. I just want to say that, even
Thank you.
yeah, even normie Christians, this idea of the Antichrist or approaching, there's a rising Luciferic thing, and we see this in, the modern medical situations, and we just kind of sweep it under the rug, and it's kind of understandably so. But
I don't think it's Luciferian as much as so the Luciferian. Okay, I've got like 3 different areas I want to cover. I'm going to start with one of them. Let's talk about the Luciferian thing. So I think the primary
spilling water on myself. Spilling water on myself.
What was that?
I'm excited.
Okay. I think the primary sin or dysfunction of the Western world over the last, I would say, post World War II. So I think it's been about 80 years. I think the right way I think one way to think about it, and I'm not settled on this at all, so this is me really, really speculating, is this flight from vulnerability. In that
we don't want to be Christian, almost at a destiny level. No, I mean. No,
you're exactly right.
Like there's this like, because in order to be Christian, you have to be like God's in control, and no one wants to believe that at all, ever. That's the one first principle that people will not accept, and even people who say it don't want to accept it because it's so alien.
Americans haven't contended with real hardship, like real struggle, real hardship since the Great Depression, since the 1930s. And so virtually every American alive today hasn't really contended with real hardship. Now, it's not true at an individual level. Like at an individual level, people have experienced traumatic, like actual traumatic events where maybe they were in the Vietnam War and their leg was blown off, or you know um they had a child and their child had an illness or something and passed away, and that does happen, but my point is it's rare. Like that sort of real trauma, like something that's actual real trauma where you're burying a child, or like as an infant you
Let's just
are.
say, let's say maybe extreme.
It's not extreme though. So what I'm saying is that was normal for all of human history
Yeah, I just don't.
until, yeah.
I just think you. I just want. I imagine you're not trying to say that like the traumas nowadays aren't real. Like you said like real traumas. Like
Yeah. So,
yeah.
so like we say that we have a God-shaped hole in our heart, but maybe we also have a suffering-shaped hole in our heart, and
Yeah. No, I'm
meaning,
following what you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is that no matter how big the trauma is, maybe it expands to fill that suffering-shaped hole in our heart, so that we're convinced that like the little thing that happened in, I don't know, in school or whatever, where I was embarrassed, is like the worst thing ever, and that's expanded. So, um, why am I talking about this? Okay, so going back to Adam and Eve in the garden, the the Luciferian impulse is something like you could have it's like an enticement. It's like you could have more than you have now. One question is like, why was Eve even tempted by it? If things were so good, if things were so perfect, why? Because I understand the subsequent step, what happens, better than I understand like why was Eve tempted in the first place. The subsequent thing I understand is that once her eyes are opened, I mean, Peterson through the Genesis lectures did this brilliantly, which is like the clothes represent like hiding yourself from the world. That's hiding from God. That's what it represents is like I'm vulnerable. Saying like, oh man, I can be hurt. I think Peterson nailed that. And so pharmacon. So this is the American culture in a nutshell, is convenience. So pharmacon is like, you have this problem, we have a pill. Like Americans have been conditioned to say whatever you want, you can solve it, you can get it right now. And in medical speak, that's a pill. In medical speak, it's like you don't have, like, not only will your insurance cover it, but you can get it like at your local pharmacy. It's right there. Like it's the Amazon, delivery right at your door. It's very and I love the conveniences of our modern world. I love it. But it's like, if my father has this problem, or my mother, or whatever, like there could be the hard, arduous way of confronting that problem. Or here's, so let's say you're struggling with like your brother or something like that, and it's really weighing you down, and you're going to therapy, and and all these things are happening. Then do you struggle through the therapy, or it's like, here's a pill that can take away 20% or 50% of your pain? You're like, oh, that pill's way easier. So, and then regarding pharmacon, like, so you have, let's say, these natural things, like let's say marijuana, or just anything. Then you have the whole, and I'm with you on the industrial complex that's set up to make money. So you have vulnerability paired with greed. That's what I see. I see the American public has problems, or the world public, and more the world's becoming like America. So they have some vulnerability, some pain, something, oh, I need this pill and this will make it better, or I need this product. And same with advertising, like I need this product, and then socially I will be higher regarded. And ultimately, like, that social status is about like, can I position myself better in the social hierarchy such that or can I give myself certain feelings that make me feel better? So all of it's about vulnerability in relation to where you are in the world. And then you pair that with greed, with the impulse of like, oh, people are feeling this way, and we can make them feel this way, and we can give them a thing that will alleviate it. But it just, the what I'm saying is the suffering shaped hole never goes away. So as good as we make, as good as we solve the problems, there's still like something else goes into the suffering hole. And by the way, this idea of the suffering whole, like that's something I just thought of on this conversation. So if people disagree, or I'm interested in people's thoughts about that.
Reminds me of what was it called? I got it right here in 3, 2, 1. It's called the Lacan. Lacan, the philosopher.
I've heard of him. I don't know much about his thinking.
I think he talks a lot about the lack.
It keeps me going. It keeps me coming back. It keeps me reading. It keeps me studying and growing in my own formation as an analyst, because there's this certain sort of axiom at its basis.
Is lack a term from Lacan? Is he something who worked with lack?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
It's quite embedded in his vocabulary.
Okay, so that thing that made you, and I choose these words carefully, that made you fall in love with Lacan and not say with Lyotard or Foucault or Jung as a complete different kind of psychologist. So the thing that made you fall in love with Lacan was the idea of dealing with lack.
Yes.
Did I get that? Yes?
Yes. And lack is the precursor for desire. What is desire if not a movement towards lack? Because if it was otherwise, if desire was a movement towards an object that we can get, then it would be quite fleeting. We would not experience it. But desire is something that keeps on operating in our lives. Not because we get what we want, exactly because we constantly defer getting what we want. And I think working with Lacan is working with desire. It is a pure desire in this sense.
You said working towards desire, and you said desire is working towards lack. Yes. Isn't that? I wonder. I mean, it's not really towards lack, isn't it? It's out of lack.
Well, lack is its cause, we might say.
Right. Yes. But I'm not going towards the lack, or do I? That would be the kind of psychoanalysis if we subconsciously looking for lack in order to feel desire.
I'll give you two metaphors to engage with that.
Like the
that's the libidinal pursuit of the lack that Luke always goes on about. All right, yeah.
And that's like a similar. I don't know if that's similar, but it came to mind.
Rollins, what he's positing basically with his ontic unknowing is that, so again, the framework, Rollins' big work with pyrotheology, which is kind of his thing, is that psychoanalytically, a lot of what drives human beings is this pursuit of the lack, this thing that promises to make you whole and complete. Whatever you're pursuing, so, and this is symptomatic. So, the alcoholic is pursuing alcohol because he thinks, well, that will remedy whatever my problem is, but then you have to get deep enough into your alcoholism to rock bottom, whatever rock bottom is. We had this discussion with Chad. What is rock bottom? We were talking about this the other day. And rock bottom is basically just like where we had a consensus basically that rock bottom isn't when you've just like, you have no other resort, but it's when you've had the realization or the epiphany or the quickening, the enlightenment to realize that you're ready for a metanoia, you're ready for a change, you're ready for repentance, you're ready to actually do something different rather than keep using your because the alcoholism is the symptom of a deeper disease, or as Chad would say in alcoholism, the spiritual malady, whatever your spiritual malady is. But all of that is, you could frame all of that within the greater spiritual pattern of the lack, the libidinal pursuit of the lack, which is whatever, fill in the blank, whatever promises to make you whole and complete. And so Rollins would like to frame that a lot of modern religion, claims to fill your God-shaped hole. If you just do this, you just say this prayer, you just get Jesus, you just believe these things, you just do these things, you just, whatever the religious institution is telling you to do. And this is religious and irreligious, because everything's religious, everything's spiritual, everything is oriented toward whatever highest good that they think they see, the right side of history, whatever. And then if you just do X, if you can just get X, then you'll be happy. Rollins will talk about this in terms of materialism. You know, if I just have this amount of money per year, if I can just travel this much, if I get FU money, you know, people talk about that. The kind of money where all your bills are paid, you know, universal basic income, whatever. Or if you just get self-help, you know, enough compassion, you do enough yoga and breathing exercises and meditation and then you'll get peace, you'll get transcendence, you'll get nirvana, you'll get whatever. But like all of that can be a trick of this pursuit of the lack. But what Rollins basically posits is that you never get there. There isn't a lackless existence. To exist is to have the lack to some degree. That's what he's positing. So like he would say the lack goes all the way down even into God himself. So to lack is to exist, is to be, is, you know, whatever.
What I'm saying is the suffering shaped hole never goes away. So as good as we make, as good as we solve the problems, there's still like something else goes into the suffering hole.
Yeah, you know, that's, you know, it's a huge conversation, you know, like the diagnosis of modernity and kind of, you know, I think the point about how people haven't had a lot of suffering is poignant.
Because the clothes in the garden are not enough. What comes after the clothes is, let me build a city with walls that will protect. And then it's like, let me make more things that'll protect. So let's have air conditioning that protects from the heat, and let's have refrigerators that protect from bacteria, and let's have this and this and it goes. And I love civilization, so I'm not against
Well,
it.
I'm more inclined to think that the serpent in the garden was Satan rather than Lucifer, and I distinguish between the two. So I'm kind of having trouble mapping this like.
Can you elaborate on that distinction? Because I don't have that distinction.
Yeah, I don't know if I can, to be honest, because I think that Lucifer is an ambivalent fallen angel that has to be integrated, but that does not mean integrating Antichrist or Satan. You know, that's different. The best way I think is to think about technology and medicine, you know, such that when the Luciferic technology of medicine was given to humanity, let's say, you know, to use this very symbolic language, that was an ambivalent thing, you know, and it can be good, but it can also be evil, you know, like clothing, you know, like clothing is a Luciferic technology, right? Let's say. However, um, this idea of like the fall the fall would be in my mind more connected to like Satan, which would be like something to do with not uh recognizing uh things as being unified. You know, it's like there's no unity within division anymore, or something like that. And I think that's like a bigger pattern. It's almost like Lucifer shows up after the fall or something. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
that's interesting. I have to meditate on that a little bit, but I think you're right that there's kind of I haven't really thought about the different aspects of how evil is presented, because there's definitely the scattering aspect, the dividing aspect, but I haven't really thought about how the temptation aspect connects to the scattering aspect.
Mm.
Because those are
Yeah,
like two
I don't have it pinned
different.
down either. Yeah.
Yeah. hmm
Yeah. Um,
I think maybe it's something like this. Maybe the temptation aspect is always outside of tradition. It's always outside of the known. So in effect it's always kind of a you're going outside the walls or the boundaries. Um, and
Yeah. Yeah, that's
yeah.
obviously, I don't know, I beat around the bush with regard to Griffin's work. But like in his way, that's the Luciferic is connected with the strange and the fringe in a sense. In a sense, it's kind of it's I don't have it all kind of mapped in my head all the way, but
It pries into things it can't understand. It sees patterns where there are none, and conjures false explanations. The first is a controller. It prefers a world where things make sense, where danger is not, and where all is well. The second is a trickster. It likes surprises, excitement, challenges, and mysteries.
Yeah, like the strange, such that going out, like it's the future and encountering the new. It's all things new, and like um you have stasis and then like renewal, and it's kind of on the renewal side, and so that would connect as well, in my opinion, where you the idea of going outside of the tradition or something, and like um seeing things in your own I'm not fucking in your own idiosyncratic way, would be um that could be a good thing, but if you take it too far, then that's no good.
The trend, let me know what you think of this. So the trend that I see in technological history, not necessarily biblical, but maybe biblical history, but the trend I see in technological history is that
this was also the time in which we came to understand and master electricity. Up to then, this was the only kind of electricity we understood. Lightning striking at us from above. But we stole that lightning and we made it ours. We bound it with wires. What do wires do but connect one thing to another? And what do wires look like? Our technological advancements produced abundance, and so production became less about quality and more about quantity. That is to say, the quality went down, and the goods were made widely available. As I recall, that was in large part thanks to this, the moving assembly line, first employed by Henry Ford in the manufacture of the automobile, the invention which has made long-distance transportation affordable and easy, the invention which has allowed us to create nation-spanning freeways and vast networks of roads, the invention which is the direct cause of urban sprawl, which is when cities grow far too wide. It's becoming a massive problem. Another thing which began to spread farther and faster than ever was information, a trend which has reached its height in the modern internet. In the prior age, the most valued thing had been Christian virtue. In the second, it instead became a kind of pagan liberation. This shift in values is most apparent when looking at the luminaries of the two ages. The first was the age of the saint. The second was the age of the genius. It's quite interesting that the title of saint refers to spirits in heaven. For that reason, angels also hold this title. And likewise, genius is related to the daemon of ancient Greece. These were the earthly pagan spirits, which later became the demons of Christian myth. How strangely these things all come back together.
whenever we have a new like let's say epic of technology, we have like kind of a new paradigm or whatever, like electricity might be a case in point.
The story in Revelation goes that when the dragon was cast down to earth, his tail swept a third of the stars from the sky. Perhaps this is what they were talking about. Lightbringer indeed. And funnily enough, these things are the source of modern light pollution. The reason most of the stars are not visible in populated places. But of course they didn't just disappear. They fell to earth, just as the good book said they would. And so if you look down at the shadow of the earth, you can see where they landed. The reason there are now so few stars in the sky is because they're down here on the ground with us. You really can't make this stuff up.
Or like nuclear technology or something like that. We tend to always overshoot, and how the overshooting occurs is always like blatantly obvious after the fact.
The saturation of Western culture with sexuality is also significant. The sexual act itself involves the removal of physical barriers, connection, and crossing boundaries. First physical ones, and if it goes past that, cultural ones. This is one of the most striking contrasts with the prior period. In the first age, sex was strictly controlled and confined to marriage. In the second, not so much.
But then there seems to be like this undercurrent of virtue that accompanies the technological development. So let me give you an example, like a modern example that we're living in right now, like we're doing right now.
This conversation technology,
which is like within the corner, there's an overwhelming understanding of like the dangers and the pitfalls of social media in various ways, shapes, forms that we've seen over the last 15 years, right? Where the dream of the social media archons was, if only everyone could connect, then the world would understand each other and we'd live in peace and harmony forever and ever. Amen. That was Mark Zuckerberg's prayer. And that hasn't happened. And yet, so like the technology has enabled that Luciferian aspect, or maybe the division aspect. So it's like the technology is the Luciferian, and then the satanic is the division that inevitably occurs. But what's interesting is that under the surface, so we're doing this within TLC. And so like whenever I think about how God moves and acts, it's always like under the surface. Like it's the subtlest. It doesn't proclaim itself. It doesn't talk about itself. It doesn't it tries to keep it tries to keep the good hidden for the sake of the good, almost. It's like the act of trying to spread the good is almost Luciferian in some way, shape, or form. Not at the level of the individual, I don't think, but at the level of like a principality where you're like proclaiming, like,
yeah, in a way, yeah.
It's almost like this. And what I'm saying right now is like, it's so hard for me to square this with like go out into the world and proclaim the gospel to all nations. But it's like, I guess what I'm trying to square this with is, in my own experience, the only success that I've had in proclaiming the gospel is like an individual relationship with someone I care about. Like I have to be personally invested with that person. And only when that happens can there be any growth. And that's also not necessarily with me, because I mean, I'm definitely affected by principalities, is what I'm saying. But like if I'm affecting someone else, it's always on an individual basis, like in my own experience.
Yeah.
Anyway, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I think about the Luciferic as being kind of an individual thing and the personal thing, and such that but obviously, if you take those things too far and you get modern individualism, ism, where it's like 10 isms, and and kind of yeah, and if you take personalism too far, then you end up in like solipsism or something like that, and
But what do you think about this idea of like the good is always this sort of undercurrent that
yes,
is,
okay, yeah, there was
yeah,
something else about that too. Yeah, like I think that it reminds me of the idea of like the left-handed angels or something, like God's, like all the suffering in the world is God actually working in a way that's kind of beyond our comprehension, but is ultimately still loving or something like that, you know? And um yeah, I definitely think that like the idea that oh yes, I think it was Steiner who said something along the lines of how Lucifer would be redeemed like throughout our time period, and he thought about like the Lucifer representing one of the thieves who was crucified next to Christ, and he said like, "You will be with me in heaven," and he was talking to Lucifer, such that Lucifer would up on that day or something that began Lucifer's redemption process or something. So I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but I'm pretty sure that's correct, and such that we find a right relationship with Lucifer, and he uh is again operating correctly under God or something like that, and I
but
think
then
that's so
what
the idea
happens
of
to the, oh, go ahead, finish.
so just the last thing is that like the idea of the fact that we're confronting this I always use the phrase, which I believe Griffin said, like the confrontation with Lucifer, the great Aquarian bottleneck, which is kind of like this is the end of the Piscean age, is the confrontation with this principle of like the Luciferic as such, and learning to kind of put it in its proper place, and like, or something along those lines, you know. I'm not sure if I have all that correctly, but that's kind of how I think about it generally, in terms of how um, technology and science and medicine and magic and uh, works and coffee, you know, is it's all it can all be, you know, it all has its place, and that place is on one side of the balance, you know, and the other side is kind of like you know, like blind obedience or something like that, you know, and devotional faith with like you know, darkness, like in praying in your closet type of thing, you know. Yeah.
Do you mind pausing for a few minutes? I'm just gonna check on
No, no.
family stuff, and
Yeah,
or like 2-minute break, and I'll be
sure,
right
sounds good.
back.
Yeah.
Right, whenever you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about the two thieves, the one on the left, one on the right, but that and the redemption of Lucifer. So that brought up the question of universalism in my
Yes.
head, because in effect, where the universalist rabbit hole goes, and full cards on the table, I'm not a universalist, but uh where the universalist rabbit hole goes inevitably is what happens to Satan. Is there or the two, both Lucifer and Satan? Is there a redemption of Lucifer and Satan in the end? And I think so. This is my personal bias, you could say, personal opinion, but it's also in line with Catholic dogma. That I think that God values free will so much that uh that he's willing to allow us to make the wrong decision for as long as, and that could be eternity, for as long as we're determined to follow our own way, so to speak.
You know, his idea is that finally what hell is when, you know, we kept saying to God, my will be done, and God finally says, okay. And that is hell. And we finally get what we asked for, and God finally relents and says, I will leave you alone. I won't bother you anymore. And one might imagine that as, you will have no more pain from me. But as we all know,
so cool. Holy shit.
the pain from us is the worst, is the true pain.
Absolutely, and that's what's crazy about it, is because that's the real trouble people have, is that if God's real, why does he let evil happen? And there could be an extent where we demanded the right to have evil, to be allowed evil. We were like, we want to be able to experience evil, and he was like, no, you're an idiot. And then we were like, no, we want to do it. We want to be able to have that experience. And he's like, you just like shut up. And then eventually, you're right, he just gave in. And now we turn around and we blame him for it. Like, we were like, we're able to handle this. And then he hands you over this burning hot coal, and you're like, what the fuck did you give me this for? And that's sort of, yeah, that actually makes sense in some sense. It's like we bit the apple, and then now suddenly we're kind of like, all right, I can we spit the apple out? Is there a catch here? You're like a little baby. Like, it's evil is so horrific that you're like, no, I just don't want to have to deal with this motherfucker.
I think that's how much let's say the adopted sonship that we are given in baptism, I think that's how much God values that. Now, I can't square that with the idea of like the ultimate redemption and the final telos of everything on this earth, but fortunately I don't need to square it, because that's not my telos to ultimately square the final redemption, or like the end state of all things on the earth. But yeah, thoughts on universalism? And
Yeah. Well, the whole topic, universal in general, is kind of, I'm still working out like my kind of, I'm still sorting the vibes in that respect. But generally I tend to think that it's, more, I lean towards, I'm a hopeful universalist, let's say, as they like to say. And um but particularly, as you mentioned it, um just for transparency's sake, I paused the recording and then you said, I also want to ask about universalism, and then that's all it was said. Um it reminded me of this one particular clip. I have a clip on my channel called Angels from the Future. And um it's of Sir Nate Heil and Kenneth Lawrence discussing Jacob's Ladder. Um, Thoughts on it? Are you interested? Maybe if I would play a brief section of it.
Go for it.
Cool,
Yeah.
cool. Cool. Let me share this. Boom. All right.
This, if you can picture like a mirror, and
what you are judged, what you are judged. Obviously, all judgment happens through Christ, but also that judgment happens through your own higher self, right? So your guardian angel participates in that judgment, like whether you have conformed to the image of what you were intended to be or not, right? There's a participation of that. But ultimately, for Bulgakov, there is he's an unambiguous universalist. He actually sees the angel Lucifer as, in that same capacity, judging Satan.
I don't remember reading that part.
It's from Sophiology of Death, but I don't remember which essay it's from.
Wow. The idea that there is like this some kernel of original goodness,
correct,
like lying underneath the hypostasis, which is Satan, right?
The corrupted hypostasis, which is Satan, which ultimately has the power in the very end of things, like beyond the end of time, by the way. Bulgakov is very clear that when you're talking about that final restoration of all things, you're talking about the very last of things after the end of time.
Right. The dual eschatological horizon.
Correct. The enemy is not truly conquered, but merely defeated until the enemy becomes the friend. So if the story we're telling is actually the conquest of evil, then it has to result in its transformation as well. Basically, it has to do with not reducing everything to quantity.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What came to my mind, and I'm going to Google the exact. What came to my mind is Philippians, chapter 2, verses 10 to 11. So I'm gonna the emphasis on what I'm gonna read is mine. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of those in heaven, and of those on earth, and of those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So that's Philippians, which I think that's written by St. Paul. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't know what the historical scholarship says on that, but when you say every knee shall bow and every tongue, that to me strikes me as every principality under the sun. So whatever Lucifer and Satan are, that's really interesting.
And it's interesting that it's not even necessarily that they'll be good, or it is that they'll be. It's that they'll be good, but it's not what we think about as good. It's not like moral in the sense. It's that they will serve their intended function. God created them to do a particular thing. The Leviathan in the ocean, right?
So that I'm fully on board with that. They will serve their ultimate telos, and that the ultimate story in the ultimate story, which will be good.
Yeah.
People apply it only to morality, but the best way to look at it is to say, a bird makes a bad chair, and that's totally fine because bad can be understood as the distance between beings. Now, is that they are now trapped in multiplicity without unity, and the unity seems that as it appears far away, and that they no longer have access to it. But if you would see good and evil from the position of good, you would say, then you would be able to identify difference in a way that is completely normal, in a way that is completely healthy, because I understand that, like I said, that a bird makes a bad chair, and that's completely fine if I know the good of the chair and I know the good of the bird. There's no problem there. And so the problem happens when it happens from the other side. And so when you look at what happens there, the nakedness is the first part.
They will serve their ultimate telos, and
Yeah.
that the ultimate story, in the ultimate story, which will be good.
Yeah, and so okay, so yeah, so that's one. Now to add a little bit more potentially heretical nuance to this, I think an interesting thing, another aspect which one might be able to look at this through, is there they were talking about Lucifer being almost like the guardian angel of Satan or something like that. Um, if I got that correctly, which is very interesting, but also in a more Abraxian way of thinking about it, perhaps it would be that I think maybe there's something, and I don't know if Griffin would agree with this. It's that um, if you look at the Cosram at the bottom, there, like the depiction of Satan is all that you get is really the skull of Adam at the bottom and the Ouroboros, right? And the Ouroboros he thinks about as Satan, and also like the Leviathan, and he's been talking about this being the Artifex, and this is connected. He's like the maker of the maze in a sense.
What you're saying is he's Daedalus.
I'm not familiar. Like Daedalus, like you, or like some myth, like
The maker of the maze? Look up Daedalus and yeah, just look
yeah.
up that word. There
Okay,
you go.
yeah. I think he's actually talked about this in his articles. It's like I'm connecting the dots now. This is yeah. Remind me what the a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, so Daedalus is a master craftsman. King Minos asks him to devise
Yeah.
the labyrinth.
Okay, so it's like
Um,
that one. Okay, yeah.
yeah. And
Wow.
I forget.
So
I actually forget. I should know this because it's kind of embarrassing that I don't know this. I forget why King Minos asks him to design the labyrinth. I know he hides the Minotaur in there, but I thought there was another purpose, and I forget the background of the Minotaur also.
yeah, I'm also embarrassed that I'm not perfectly remembering this. But I think we could
But
easily
yeah, Daedalus is a master craftsman, and and then once he designs the labyrinth for King Minos, King Minos decides to trap him in there because he says, well, no one can know the secret of my labyrinth, so I have to trap Daedalus and his son Icarus in the labyrinth. And in order to escape the labyrinth, Daedalus needs to invent wings. He needs to invent flight. And so they use some wax from, I think maybe it's even bees. I forget where the wax comes from. Yeah, you should look that up, man. And feathers from birds, and he manufactures some wings, and he says to his son, son, when we escape, you have to make sure don't fly too close to the water because the feathers will get wet, and then your wings will fall apart, and you'll fall into the sea and drown. And if you fly too close to the sun, it's going to melt the wax in your wings, and once again you will fall into the sea and drown. So he has this tough love conversation with the son, and his son says, yeah, Dad, I get it. And then they start flying. They escape the labyrinth, and his son is so excited and taken with the idea of flying. His son is like doing somersaults in the air. I forget the exact, but his son is like so excited that he's flying, and he flies too high, and despite his father's warnings, and the sun melts his wings, and he plummets down to the sea and drowns and dies. And his father laments the death of his son, that he could save himself from his own creation, but he couldn't save his son. And yeah, so that's what sticks with me. They throughout my life, there's a pattern in my life that throughout my life there's been the pattern is hubris, and the pattern is such that I tend not to be the one to face the full consequences of my hubris, but Yeah, instead it feels like that's kind of the legacy of my own personal sins, is that I have felt like I've left collateral damage in my wake with certain people and relationships. And the big one that comes to mind that I've talked about is I think it was my first conversation with McMo on Chad's channel. But I had a friend of mine who was, unhappy living with his parents, and this was the height at the financial crisis, and he couldn't find a job. And I was like, oh yeah, come live with me, because I just got out of a relationship and I was kind of lonely, and I was like, come live with me and we'll just video game all day. And we were World of Warcraft partners in Arena. We were really good. And I was like, yeah, we'll hang out, and I've got, an extra bedroom. And I think he saw the opportunity of relocating outside of his parents' house. I think he saw it as an opportunity that if his psychological state did not improve, that he had the opportunity to commit suicide. So I created that opportunity for him, you know, and also at the same time, like, I was in a job where I prided myself on, reading people, like, oh yeah, I'm really good with emotional intelligence. Yeah, I have a good sense of what people are feeling and thinking, and I'm really good with people. And so this guy is like really good with people, can't see under his own nose that, his best friend at the time is like suffering to the point of willing to end it. And anyway, so that's just one example. Like, that's the most extreme example in my own life, but like, that's a perfect example of the hubris that goes with the intellect, with the light bringer. Like, oh, I'm smart, I can figure this out, I can. So anyway, so I thought, originally the Daedalus moniker came from a video game called Deus Ex that came out in the year 2000. That and Daedalus is a certain character. It's actually an AI character in that game that really stuck with me. But then I think the reason that the Daedalus mnemonic sticks with me is it's not just, there are other things in my past, but the one I just gave you is a case in point of like my assumption that like that I can solve it, that I can fix it, that like, oh yeah, I can figure this out. And yeah, anyway, so
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that a lot, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing you talk about that story and being, very moved by it. And I almost, not to take away from any point or pattern that might be there, but maybe just to offer a little bit of consolence. Like, I wonder if maybe, you know, maybe your buddy, you know, maybe that wasn't in his mind at the time, like until much later, maybe, you know, it, it's definitely understandable to, like consider where you might have contributed, but I wonder if maybe, um, he didn't have that in mind initially in, thinking to move out and such. Like, it's, I don't know. So, and I know the feel as well. Like, I have a buddy who I've been trying to help out, and, that can be there's lots of temptation in that respect, to think that I have it all figured out and know how to solve the problems. And even if you do, like, to know how to go about the like Steiner said this. He said it's not about, he said, I don't know, I get a little really excited, but he he said, like, you can know the solution, but it's about how you apply it in a particular medical case, you know? And that's what's most important. And like, so even if I have the solutions for my buddy, um, and yeah, the temptations are there. It's kind of like the Luciferic medical impulse in a way,
that's
and
it. That's it. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna solve it. Yeah.
yeah, and but I think there's a way of balancing that impulse, or something like of, putting it in its right place, and maybe under it's serving its right function, maybe trying to connect back to universalism. Um, yeah, what exactly, how did we get onto
Universalism? Well, you were talking about the ultimate redemption, and you played the clip from Nate Heil of
Yeah.
the ultimate redemption of Lucifer.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure if I've finished.
After the end times, and but like that's where my mind has gone with universalism, is that ultimately like if it's truly universal, you have to redeem Satan, you have to redeem
Yeah.
him,
And we were talking
which
about, but how did that bring up the idea of your personal potential shortcomings and stuff?
because you were talking about creating a maze
Yes,
or yeah,
Daedalus. Yeah,
and
yeah,
then that
yeah,
reminded
yeah.
me of Daedalus, like
Dude,
but Daedalus is the artificer, is
artifacts.
that
Yeah.
no,
Okay. Well, yeah.
no, but he creates the arena, he creates the space, and says like, well, if I just set up the perfect space, then it's gonna be good. So he does that in the labyrinth itself, but he does that in like it's the idea. Okay, it's the idea of like creating the garden that's perfect, and then the snake is in anyway. It's that same idea of like I'm gonna, if I just set up the perfect arena, then I can keep all the bad out, and there's
Mhm.
no, and it's like eh.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like the Ouroboros, right? Like and Griffin uses the terminology of the artifacts, and he's kind of mythologized this as to elaborate the philosophy. But also I think he's describing aspects of reality in very good ways. And talking about the Ouroboros, um, I don't know if you would agree with this, but something about the artifact seems like a mechanical, almost like a non-real being to me, in that it might not even have like a hypostasis or something.
Mhm.
Um,
Almost like Frankenstein, or
Almost, yeah.
yeah,
And where at the bottom you have like the power of death or something like like,
yeah.
and death is not like a being, it's like a force or something. It's like so we can kill death without worrying about universalism. It's like what about, is death going to be redeemed? It's like, no, death is
Oh,
fucked.
wait. Oh,
Death is
okay.
gone.
No.
And
I
and
just had this like crazy string that I want to, based on what you're saying
okay,
about
yeah, yeah.
the artificiality, or the all this being death, and oh man, like a bunch of things just like
Yeah, it's really
fired, and
deep
I and I
stuff, I
and I
think.
don't and I don't know if I can connect it, but it's
Yeah. Well, let me
um
finish this thought
okay,
because
okay.
okay, so the idea of death at the bottom and then the Ouroboros being above that, um, maybe such that like almost like the power of death has almost become like a personal force, the Satan, like the divider, or like the Ouroboros, um, Daedalus perhaps, the artifacts, and um and uh but ultimately it's not like a true being or something. It's like what happens when you have division without unity. Like then you get this negative synthesis of the two sides, and it creates this artifacts or something like that. It's this maze. And and but I don't know. I'm just thinking in the sense where maybe like there's a way where um in if we're thinking even Satan, even disunity maybe has a place in God's kingdom, like in the eschaton or whatever, like where in a universalist sense it would be that like even Satan, um, even that force of death maybe would have like, because things die and the circle of life goes on and something, I think again about the Ouroboros being the closed circle in a way where maybe when it's redeemed, it becomes a spiral or something where um I don't know exactly, but the idea that, the circularity can ultimately be fine, like it can be good if we recognize its purpose, which is because everything in its right place. The idea of going back to the Garden of Eden is not that there's no suffering necessarily, maybe. I'm not sure, or maybe, maybe
But
it's not that there's no death. I'm not
I like
sure.
the idea of the spiral because we're never going back to Eden. Like we're never, it's always it's always progressing towards something else.
Interesting thought.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts about this idea of returning
Okay.
to Eden?
I don't think it's going to be the same as when it started.
Yeah.
I think going back to the sameness would drastically reduce the meaning or importance of life. So maybe one way of putting this is I am very biased in favor of the meaning of our lives here, and that's actually one reason that I'm not a universalist, because in order for our decisions to really matter, like everything we do really matters, there has to be consequences, and in order for
Well,
there to be, yeah.
universalism doesn't necessarily entail no consequences.
Interesting. Okay.
You know, like it basically says there's no hell, there's just a purgatory, and that could be a really long, painful purgatory. You know.
So okay, but I want to try to connect a whole bunch of things that you
Sure.
were talking about. I want to try to connect this artificiality, or the creation of industry of technology, with at the bottom of that being death.
Yeah.
And one thing that occurred to me, there's a whole bunch of things that occurred to me, I'm going to try to connect. So one thing that occurs to me is that you cannot have a resurrection without death. You cannot, or another way of thinking about that is there's nothing to transcend if everything is qualitatively equal.
It's not death to the world, you know, and it's not even like that we don't want the maze to exist or something, you know, like what, like I think there's a divine function of creation such that like God loses himself in the maze or something like that, and this continues God's being in some way, you know, and then yeah, and
so like he would say the lack goes all the way down even into God himself. So to lack is to exist, is to be, is, you know, whatever. And so that was a long excursion. So to get back to Freud and death drive, is escaping death, is escaping, you know, is transhumanism, is eternal life really a libidinal pursuit of the lack?
Like you look at the rich people now, what they're talking about is how do we get life extension? Like once you conquer every pain, you still want something. And you're eventually going to be like, I've taken over the whole world, I'm a billionaire. And it's like, all right, I can't beat death. I can't. How do we beat death? How do we beat death? And he shows you that it's possible through sacrifice. And that gives you this, like, you're like, what? That's the last thing I wanted to hear, because I wanted to hear how I could have my cake and eat it. And he's sort of saying, give up your cake and you will get all the cakes ever for the end of time. And that's such a fucking head fuck, because it's like screwing with your idea of immortality to beat death by accepting it in some sense. Yeah. It's like that amazing paradox, and there's something profound in that, obviously, like it's the fucking Christ story.
Such that you don't actually want to like get rid of like death and the like the circularity of life in something, you know, like because it serves a function, but ultimately, you know, it's not a closed system. Like God's divinity kind of communes with this and makes it not like a true death or something like that. Like of the possibility of resurrection exists, you know. Yeah.
So the my mind goes to this often because this is like the storytelling medium that I was raised with, but video games, in that like a lot of people try to look at the arena we're in from like physics and chemistry and all that and kind of reason from that to God and morality and all these things. And I was listening to the conversation with Jordan Hall and Karen Wong and what was the gentleman, DC Schindler, that just came out, and that's what they were doing. And I find myself approaching it from the exact opposite angle, which is, let's look at the forms of art that are most salient, most capturing of the human imagination of our meaning, that most capture our instinct for meaning. And those, like, I would say those that capture our instincts for meaning, at least for men, I would say it's video games. Used to be like serial TV, but even that I don't think is the same extent. And the reason that I think video games do a better job at capturing that is because of the participatory part of it. Like, you, instead of just imagining, if you watch a show, you're typically projecting yourself into the show on a few characters and sort of identifying with those characters and enjoying being part of the story, but you're projecting yourself into it. You're still doing that with a video game, but what's different about a video game is that your decisions have consequences. So one of the hardest things because this is something I think about a lot, like how to make a good game. One of the hardest things to do is to define first of all, to define a game, and then define what makes a good game, and what actually makes a game. So this is one definition of a game, and I think it's a really good one, is that you have a closed system where at least more than one, one or more participants participate in a closed system, and the outcome is different depending. It results in a disparate outcome based on actions and decisions that occur within that closed system. And so for a multiplayer game, you have to have a disparate outcome that results in so like everybody can't all win, or else the game is like really boring and stupid. Now you could have multiple human players win against the environment, like you could have player versus environment, but there's something to transcend, like that need to transcend some. This is another rabbit hole that I don't exactly want to go down, but like I was thinking of, like, what's the equivalent of a feminine MMORPG compared to a masculine MMORPG? And I think within a feminine MMORPG, there's not that transcendence. Like if you play Second Life or something like that, there's not like that thing to overcome. It seems like more, but anyway, that's another topic for another day. But like most
I think it's super. I'm following and I'm really liking what you're saying. I think it's super interesting. Yeah.
No, so I'm getting to like where I'm going. This is like a weird track to get where I'm going. Okay, so like we have this medium that is the most effective at capturing our attention, and it's like the participation in some kind of closed system that results in disparate outcomes. So it's like our decisions matter, our actions matter, and so where I want to go to this is like, okay, the best games, the very best games, you would say like, oh, I want to play that again, but you don't want to play it again because you want to retrace the exact same route. It's like you want to basically the game. So what happens in the best games is that you as the player are transformed by the game experience, or you're changed by the game. The player is changed by the game experience such that you want to start it again in a different way to see what you learned from the first experience, how that has its effect going on. So what I'm saying is like, you can
I'm also
let the
thinking
spiral.
about,
Yeah.
there can be a downward spiral as well, right?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Right. So let's say you're playing a game, and like this asshole comes in the game and just kills you arbitrarily, and then he like laughs at you in the game, and he stalks your ass, and he kills you again, and he kills you again, and he kills you again, and kills you again. And then you go to your local store in Texas, pick up a nice, find out where the guy lives, and say, and that would be a downward spiral.
Yeah.
I think something like that should actually happen at some point.
Dude. Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Oh my God, dude, this is a super far out thought, and this is like, I don't know. I think that was a beautiful. I'm so glad that you brought that to the conversation. This connection to the idea of video games. I think it's a beautiful analogy, and I think it's very fitting, and particularly with what we were saying about like consequences outside of the closed system. Such that
because the player is actually outside of that system. Yeah, go ahead.
And like where, if we're thinking about souls, or the idea that maybe souls are fractal pieces of God, where what by descending into the closed circle, into the world of creation, as humans, like his experience is furthered, or some like there is an ongoing. I think about the idea of like the living, like God is a living. If God is a person, then like I don't know. I imagine, he's perfect, but he's getting ever more perfect, or something like that.
Yeah, we speak of evolving value or evolving eternal value.
Yes.
And and so the close, but it's very scary because it almost seems to suggest that the I don't know if very scary is, but it almost is like that if people don't enjoy their time on Earth such that they don't want to come back, then what's up with the whole God and creation thing? Like, how does that story play out from there? Because obviously this seems to suggest the idea of reincarnation, or something like that. Maybe
or
where
the metaverse. So you can't come back to this one.
maybe.
No,
I don't know.
I prefer. So the way I prefer to think about it is that, if you prefer your conception of heaven to that of something you can't imagine, you're probably doing it wrong. So what I mean by that is like, if you're limited by the bounds of your own imagination of what you think is best, then you're putting pride in above, the will of God versus trusting. There's a lot of this is probably my number one peeve within Christianity. It's a lot of people who like harp on, like the normal Christians who harp on like, you got to do this to get into heaven. You got to do it. And I'm like, it's like, okay. First of all, like, what are you getting into? Like, what? And they're like, well, it's a place with this. It's like, really? Like, it's a place where you're sipping Mai Tais on a beach, coconut trees. Like, it's really what heaven is.
The idea that we go to heaven is a really distorted idea about how this works, how all of this works. The idea is that we're actually meant to embody heaven.
Yes.
Right. So it's not the idea that we go to heaven, although you could say that in a colloquial way. But the idea is rather that we're meant to embody heaven. That is, we're meant to, in manifest form, manifest these higher things. Right. So embody these higher values. Those are virtues, right? Those are, when you become virtuous, you are going to heaven.
It's like, the problem is that if I try to define God, I am in any capacity, I'm screwed. And in fact, I think that's hell. I think that is the Luciferian impulse to say it's this, I'm going to get this, whatever this thing is. Maybe it's like the specific thing, like fruit of this tree. And so you basically reduce the possibility of God. You basically reduce the totality of unknown to a specific thing and say it's that. It's the pushing the button in the modern parlance. Push button, get pill. Instead, and that maybe, anyway, so I just connected a few things.
There's so much up in the air right now. It's hard to keep track. It's I separate like the idea of the eschaton and heaven, like as the kingdom of heaven. I almost think about like the eschaton or like the New Jerusalem type of thing as like the perfect marriage of heaven and earth in a way.
But what is a human being? Well, a human being is this marriage of heaven and earth. If you think about heaven as, this world that doesn't decay, this story that doesn't decay, and then my body and everything going on around me.
Where you have like the heavenly realm and the created realm, and the state that is calling us is the state where those are both perfectly connected all the time. And
time is such a weird concept.
It's
when thinking about God, it's like, what was God doing when he created time? Like, what?
We would be completely different human beings if we did not have the connection with the realm of eternity, the realm where time does not play a role. All the spirits of the higher hierarchies that we know belong to this realm of eternity, the only exception being the spirits of form. They play into the realm where things evolve in time. However, their life is spatial and non-spatial.
And well, I think Plato got. I really like Plato's that time is the moving image of eternity, and in eternity is when heaven and earth are perfectly connected, or something, and every moment is kind of like we're circumambulating that eternity in a way. Yeah, it's hard to talk about, like you're saying, but the idea is that in that place where heaven and earth are connected, I think maybe even in that place, like death and the idea of disunity. I don't know though, because death has been like defeated, like that's kind of a thing where it's kind of, but maybe that's what it means, to defeat death is to see it in its proper context or something. And
I think it's that acceptance. Like to
or
defeat it
to,
is to acceptance and allow the eternity of
yeah,
God to, instead of you trying to hold on to
yeah.
life or hold on to anything as a false idol, it's acceptance of God's will.
And it has something, yeah.
It's that most of the time what I tend to do is to point people to the beauty, right? To the fullness, to the fact that the world is full of light, that the world is full of the grace of God, that the world is full of these patterns that point us to their meaning and shine. And I think that that's absolutely true. But there's also another aspect to the way the world exists, which is that we always have to be disappointed in the things that we find along the way. And that's actually a necessity. It actually has to be that way. There's no way around it. And it has to be that way for the, when I talk about this hierarchy of reality.
Speaking of hierarchies, good morning.
Right? These layers of how the world exists as this fractal structure of things embedded into each other. Well, it seems like one of the corollaries to that, or one of the things that makes that possible, is that everything, while being full, is also always insufficient all the time. It always has to be, and that seems to be a big part of the story that you find in Scripture, like the whole big narrative. And the crucifixion is the surprising part of that. It's like one of the most surprising ways that the story tries to.
Surprise! Now, it resonated with this thing I happened to open earlier when I was, poking around my own computer where I keep some of the PDFs that I've downloaded and such, called The Circle of the Serpent. And I didn't bother reading all this stuff in the middle, right? But I went down to here at the bottom there. And since it resonated with what you just heard, I'm now going to read that to you and see if you see. Anyway. This is the cosmic myth, the esoteric drama which underlies the exoteric process of evolution. It sets forth in the first place the idea of the open circle and the closed circle. The open circle, or the spiral, is the world before the fall of the 6 days of creation, crowned by the 7th day, the cosmic Sabbath, which corresponds to what one designates in mathematics as the step of the spiral. It suggests the idea of unlimited growth and advancement being through its form only the introduction or antechamber to eternity. It promises unlimited progress. The closed circle, in contrast, is in principle only a prison, whatever its extent may be. It is a wheel which turns on itself and therefore suggests no advancement beyond its circle. The idea that the closed circle or wheel suggests is that of eternal repetition. 3 historical personalities have vividly portrayed the idea of the cosmic wheel, although each of them did so in a different way. These are Mahatma Buddha, Solomon, and Friedrich Nietzsche. And so, I don't know if you guys detected any resonance between those two. But there's segment one of our fancy pants kindergarten American Idology stream.
Maybe that's what it means, you know, to defeat death is to see it in its proper context or something. And
I think it's that acceptance. Like to defeat it is to acceptance and allow the eternity of God to, instead of you trying to hold on to life or hold on to anything as a false idol, it's acceptance of God's will.
And it has something, and it also, I would say, I agree. And I also think it has something to do with the idea of resurrection, like the idea that the circle is not actually closed. Like, you know, that there is that, you know, the player on the outside of the game is actually, you know, experiencing something, you know, or something like that, you know? Yeah.
I've had this image whenever I've been in my deepest depression, I had this image that popped into my mind from time to time of like, and it became sort of a comforting image because I recognized this pattern within me where I had this feeling, and I could just be like standing normally. I could even be sitting, but I could be standing normally where I feel like I'm falling just into emptiness, like utter void. I'm just falling. And whenever that happens, I find that if I just accept it and I say, okay, then I'm falling into emptiness, then almost immediately upon acceptance, I feel the relief, like almost immediately upon it, just leaning into it and saying, yep, you know, something's dying within me, so to speak. Then relief takes its place, and that's the new birth that comes from this source that's way beyond us, that we don't know, that when we let
True.
something die within
Thank
our
God for
psyche.
that. You know, thank God for that. I'm sure we can both, you know, in those hard moments, so like it's always that miracle that comes from nowhere, you know, that comes from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, that, you know, like that's the way forward. And, you know, good shout.
Yeah.
It also it reminds me of you saying that reminds me of a couple experiences, stories. I've a couple stories for you. Uh one okay, so yeah, one was that we see this pattern all over the place, right? Where like when um you know, the kind of transcendence of the closed system, and um the temporality aspect is very interesting, where it's almost like it's always the realization, it's the seeing things in their proper place or something, the getting a higher perspective, that's what opens, you know, the circle. And but the way that it plays out in time is always interesting, because it's like you know, we're struggling with something and then the relief happens, and or there'll be an insatiable problem. And I just wanted to share a story. I told this to Sherry the other day, and it was really, I was happy about I feel like I put my spirit into my telling of it, you know. But hopefully I'll be able to relay it. It'll be hard this time because I don't have the coin, which kind of but I'll use this dime as an example. Is that I have this coin which was given to me by my aunt at my first communion, and Catholic, by the way. And
wow.
And uh it said, it has a little cross like cut out in the middle, and it said, may you grow in grace and knowledge of our Lord. And I would always kind of use it almost like I think they're called like Nala beads, or you know, like a rosary beads as well. Just like flipping it in my finger like this, and as kind of like a meditative thing. And there was a time where I lost this coin, and I was like, oh man, I was really beating myself up, because it was really kind of like a sacred object to me. And I was like, I can't find it, you know. Bummed, I was freaking out. And I remember I was at my workplace, and I went out back to the place where gosh, I'm gonna find it right now. But I went out to the just the place in the back where people would smoke, and I was looking at under the cracks, and I was like, man, I'm not gonna find it, you know. I gave up, and I went back inside. I walked over, and I was putting on gloves,
Mm.
and I turned around, and I was looking at the ground, and in my direct line of sight, it rolls out. It rolls out from underneath the dish pit. It rolls out from like underneath the dishwashing machine, and it rolls out right in my field of view. And and then it stops. Like, bro, and this is and it was when I gave up. I don't know if I added that part, but I was like, I'm giving up. I'm not gonna find it.
Yeah.
And right when I gave
Wow.
up, I stopped my willful search or something,
Yeah.
that's when I found it. And or that's when it was given to me,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and and um and that is one of the miracles that I hold on to in my life, that like whenever in my moments where things don't make sense, sometimes it'll pop in my mind. I'm like, you know there is workings beyond my comprehension, and um unfortunately, the day after I told that story to Sherry, I have seemingly misplaced the coin again. Perhaps it's me flaunting the miracle or something, hopefully not. God willing, I'm not making light of this crazy happening in my life, like because it really was crazy, and I'm hoping that I find the coin again. Or that it is given to me again, if it be God's will, you know, and I try not to worry about it, because that's seemingly the way, you know. And so that's one thing. I don't know if there's something you want to say. You're welcome
You just
to.
gotta pray to Saint Anthony. It's that
Yeah,
simple.
yeah. My mom was more Catholic than my dad. Both of them kind of fell away from it, but
Yeah.
that's one thing that she would still kind of hold on to, is prayers to Saint Anthony.
Yeah, like the if anything, it's weird. All the saint prayers and stuff are the furthest away from my psyche. I have to actively like work them into my psyche because I was not raised with them. But
Mm.
I know how strongly they have entrenched themselves, even after like the core aspects of faith have are no longer practiced, let's say, within individuals. They're like the how do I say it? Like the legacies of Catholicism still are like firmly entrenched
Yeah,
in people's beings. It's so interesting, so
it
fascinating.
is.
Yeah.
Really is. That reminds me of the clip I just posted of um my conversation with Sherry, where she was reading about how the future, arrives in us from, like this is how the future arrives. How did that come to mind? Where oh yeah, where like, something has changed in humanity, like something struck, like there has been a turning point in human history, and we're still processing it, and like
Mhm.
and and it's also coming from the future as well, and
I,
how
I think I think
how
it's the equivalent of an evolutionary phase shift or jump.
I think about it
Uh,
that way largely too. Yeah.
yeah. We don't have to take the conversation in that way, but we
Yeah.
can
No
if you
worries.
like. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps.
It is necessary to bring about the spiritual awareness, to understand these things, to bring about a sense of responsibility with regard to evolution. It is easy, really easy, to criticize the evolution of humanity. Eurythmy will become something that is quite general, for evolution does not reach its goal through moving forward in a one-sided way, but through moving forward by means of opposites. One must always create the counterpole, assert the value of the counterpole. Evolution is motivated by opposites, and a counterpole must be created.
But just the idea that, like the scaffolding, even in the secular people, like it's funny, we're on the other side of the hump now in terms of like, you know, not that this is like the end of Christianity, but I think it's the when I talk about the end of the hump, this is all part of the plan, like this is Jesus prophesied this part as well. Um, but like it's interesting that now we can see, like, yeah, even in the secular folk, like Christianity is deep in the bones of the Western mind, and it's fascinating. Yeah. Um, I would be keen to talk about evolution, but one more quick story about
the Kabbalah actually sees that that whatever is the ground of being ends off is actually coming into being.
one more quick story about falling into darkness, as you were talking about, so which is hard stuff, and it reminded me of something which I think maybe contributes to our conversation about Jung forthcoming, and I'm not sure if you're still planning to do that, but I hope you are. And
I'm still on the fence about it,
okay,
but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I had this one of my other most powerful mystical happenings was when this one was more of like a imaginative vision type of thing. And it was on the border between sleeping and waking. I was waking up in the morning, and it was kind of one of those mornings where I didn't really have any rush, and I was able to kind of abide in that liminal space, you know? And um and this was also like a couple years ago when I was really in the crazy world, you know, like in the spiritual realm, like against my will. And
You seem I just want to mention you seem happier lately than I remember you from months ago. So whatever you're doing, it seems to be going in the right direction. Yeah.
it's really like that I've articulated what I've been trying, you know, like the things that I didn't know how to make sense of. I feel like I've pointed to them with my words,
Mhm.
hopefully somewhat effectively, and that people are kind of like, oh, I think he's, you know, it seems like there might be something there. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
feeling less. I appreciate your observation or whatever. I don't know. Social dynamics are hard.
Yeah, you got a friend in
But
me. It's always really interesting talking to you. Like I'm never bored in our conversations. So yeah.
same to you,
Yeah.
man. You know,
Yeah.
same to you.
Yeah.
So in those times, there was one experience where I was in bed and I actually like experienced falling. You know when Gandalf falls into the chasm?
Yeah. Fly, you fools.
Yes, I think yes, and there's like that scene of the light, you know, him falling as the light into the pool of water.
I have a pet peeve about that scene in the movies, but finish your story and then I'll
Sure.
talk
Well, I
about
think
my pet peeve.
it might be relevant because,
Mm,
as I said, this maybe connects to Jung in a way,
mhm,
where um, you know, this idea of the black water
mhm,
is kind of like the unconscious, right?
mhm,
You know,
mhm. Yep.
falling into the unconscious, and um, falling in. But it's interesting how with Jung, but one more thing about that vision is that it was so visceral, man. It was crazy. It was like I felt the water on my body and like you know the experience of the like dark like the visual sensation of falling and stuff, and it was wild. And I remember then I went.
I would go further and say that I would say Moria in general is symbol or emblematic of the unconscious, and the water at the base of Moria is like it's almost like death at the bottom of the unconscious. Like if you
Mm,
go all the way down and it's like pure chaos, it's
mm,
pure death. But interestingly, it's also rebirth. It's also baptism. It's also like it's the bottom layer of the unconscious. So
yeah,
anyway, go ahead.
man.
Mhm.
No, yeah, no, that was good. And um, yeah, and that's kind of it connects, I think, to what I'm thinking, which is about how there's a weird thing with Jungian psychology where the unconscious is down, you know, the collective unconscious is down, but there's also a way in which the spiritual world is up,
Mhm.
you know? And I think these are the same in a sense, right? There's also a sense where we talk about the spiritual world below.
Mhm.
And there's also a way I think where we can see the collective unconscious above in the stars, actually.
But it's all
Um,
relational relation to where you are. So like if you're in the water, so if Neo is in the water after Neo awakes, it's salvation with the light above that comes down with the claw and plucks him from the water. So he's in death. He's in the water, he's dying, he's drowning. And then the light of the mechanical thing, you know, and then it's just the claw of God, the hand of God reaches down, picks Neo and brings him, welcome to the new world. You know?
yeah, that's I think a beautiful analogy. You know, some people might be hesitant, and I think there is appropriate hesitancy with the Matrix in the sense where that world is actually not here. You know, like there's no connection between the worlds. It's completely illusory, you know?
Mhm.
Um, whereas I think the waking up of the from the maze, the the becoming a not NPC in the video game, you know, the lucid dreaming, however you want to say it, in the world, um, you shall be as gods, um, is like that's like you're still here. You know, like as I said, the kingdom, the eschaton is when heaven and earth are connected. It's not when you're just off in heaven away from creation. You know, I kind of like the idea of maybe there's some sort of balance between the life, uh, the life between birth and a new death, and then the life as we experience it, or something like that. Like Steiner, that's the way Steiner thought about it, where you're in the spiritual world, and then you're on in the created world, and then you're in the spiritual world, and there's like a, and maybe there's a way where like eventually you're enthroned or something, where but yeah, the idea that the eschaton is when they're connected. So you're still, when you wake up from the matrix, you're still here, you know? And it's funny because you're still here, but it is kind of like, you know, sometimes it's, you realize, one, you wake up and you're in paradise, you know, and that's kind of how I think about returning to Eden in a sense. And things are different, and maybe there's more to be. I think I didn't really respond to you saying that. I think that's a good topic that I would like to talk about if you're still curious. But um, it's kind of like paradise, but it's also like you wake up and you're in the desolate wasteland, like the Matrix, you know, because you realize that, oh man, you know, like the kingdom is at hand, but we're kind of trampling it overfoot right now, you know, and that's an interesting thing, you know. Like I think maybe my friend experienced a bit of that with my showing him the kingdom is at hand, you know, and then, you know, it's like Neo throws up when he wakes up from the Matrix, right? Because it's like, whoa, this is, you know, so that's kind of
I mean, that's his
yeah.
deconstruction when he wakes up from. Yeah, I think he throws up after he gets plugged in the first time and Morpheus shows him
Gotcha.
everything.
Yeah, I'm
And
misremembering the movie.
and then the first words he says after he wakes up from throwing up, he says, I can't go back, can I? Can't go back. It's like the Israelites in the desert complaining to Moses, man, at least when we were slaves, we had food and we, you know, you brought us to this wasteland.
Mhm.
And that complaining is like 10 minutes after he parted the Red Sea for
Yeah.
them. So
Yeah, it's
now
crazy to
Neo,
think about that,
yeah,
man. That's a really powerful thing to think about, in my opinion. Because that's how I experience it. You know, is that uh, I'll find myself, you know, jumping right back into the maze, you know, all the time.
yeah.
And
But ironically, so the Israel, there's something that just occurred to me is that the Israelites didn't experience death because they didn't go into the water because Moses parted the sea. So they weren't reborn, so to speak, right then and there. Now the rebirth of Israel, the closest, what comes to my mind in terms of the rebirth of Israel, or the death and rebirth, is the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian captivity. I don't know if you know about his, but like Israel was completely destroyed, like completely. And this was about 600 BC. I'm off by like 50 years or so probably, but like maybe like 550 BC. But here's what's interesting. Israel, historically speaking, was somewhat monotheistic and somewhat polytheistic up until that event, up until the destruction of Israel. And they were all carted off to slavery. You know, not everyone, but the vast majority of the Jewish people were. And it was only in the Babylonian exile where the only thing that united them was their monotheistic God and their traditions around that. And it wasn't until the Babylonian exile that the Bible in its current form, or the Old Testament, came to be born.
My blunt question that I wanted to ask Gad, but I never asked him, is that the fact that we don't have a mention of Moses, Noah, or Abraham anywhere in on these thousands of texts, do you think it's, I want to phrase this right. Do you think it's a legit hypothesis to say that the Torah didn't even exist yet before Elephantine?
Okay, so again, we need to be careful when we talk about exist. What do we mean by exist? Do we mean that did it exist anywhere? Was there any scroll that had texts that looked anything like the Torah that we have today? That's one question. The other question is, did people know about this? That ordinary people that you would meet in the street, if you were to stop someone in the street and say, hey, you know that story about Moses, Mount Sinai, 10 Commandments? Does any of that ring a bell to you? It's a very, very different question. And again, I want to stress, it's the first question that scholars usually ask. The second question about what the ordinary people know about is a question that is almost not asked in scholarship. It's just, for some strange reason, it was surprising to me when I discovered this, that scholars just aren't interested in this question. There's one scholar, I won't mention his name, but as I was writing my book, I was arguing with him about a very specific detail. Again, I won't get into. And I was going back and forth, and I couldn't understand where the disconnect was, why I wasn't able to get through to him the point that I was making. And at one point in our conversation, I said, but how do you know that the farmer, the craftsman, the ordinary person that you meet in the street knew anything about this? And his answer was, who cares about the farmer? And it was at that moment that I realized he actually didn't care about the farmer. And most scholars don't. I couldn't even imagine, before that conversation, I couldn't even imagine that was the case. I thought, of course, people, we're talking about ordinary people. We're talking about 99.999% of the population. The intellectuals whose writings have been left over in biblical texts and other texts, other literary texts, made up a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of the population. So, it's interesting what they wrote, but I would think that scholarship should be interested in what 99.999% of the population were thinking and doing and so on. But scholarship generally doesn't ask these questions. And getting back to Elephantine, we have a window here on one specific community, but the ordinary people in that community, the stuff that they left over, which is what's so wonderful about it. Getting to your specific question, yes, the fact that we don't have any references to any of the biblical texts, stories, laws, the fact that we have practices which go against, which contravene Torah law, all of this suggests that the ordinary people who were living at Elephantine, the ordinary Jews who were living in Elephantine, again, we're talking about the 5th century before the Common Era. So this is after the destruction of the Judean kingdom, the Israelite kingdom and the Judean kingdom in the late Iron Age. This is, 100, 200 years after this. This is significant.
Yeah. The ordinary people there's no doubt that the ordinary people.
The material that we find in Elephantine is material that reflects ordinary people, right? Written by, just ordinary people that are writing notes to each other. In Babylonia, we also have, Judeans taking oaths by foreign gods. So these are the kinds of things that, if we're interested in cult and culture, these are the kinds of things that we can learn from these texts. If we want to try to answer the question, when did ordinary Jews revere other gods and when did they stop doing so? We're going to have to look at texts other than biblical texts. We're going to have to look at things like the archives from Elephantine, from Babylonia. And the bottom line is there is no evidence for this happening before the 2nd century, the middle of the 2nd century before the Common Era. And on the converse, we have in the Persian period evidence, both in Elephantine and in Mesopotamia. And I think also there's evidence from the coins from Judea, which suggests that there were gods other than Yahweh that were being at least acknowledged well into the 4th century before the Common Era. It's important here to stress the fact that we don't have evidence doesn't mean that we know what's going on, right? There are periods of time where we simply don't have much evidence for anything.
Right.
It's important here to stress the fact that we don't have evidence doesn't mean that we know what's going on, right? There are periods of time where we simply don't have much evidence for anything.
Right.
And it was only in the Babylonian exile where the only thing that united them was their monotheistic God and their traditions around that. And it wasn't until the Babylonian exile that the Bible in its current form, or the Old Testament, came to be born. So what I'm saying is, like, it's only in the destruction of everything. Like, they lost the temple, they lost their entire country, they lost their city, they lost their freedom, they lost their temple, they lost the house of God, they lost everything. And it's only when that happens that, like, the true Jewish, I shouldn't say the true Jewish people, but like the Jewish people in the form that we think of the Old Testament and the Jewish people today, it's only when that happened that's when the Jewish people really came together. Yeah.
Yeah, trying to connect that to the idea of like
Well, it's the
yeah,
it's the same death and rebirth.
The way in which things will get better is actually by getting worse. That in doing that, our vision will become clearer, our responses will become more natural, and we will see what matters, and that which matters to us and which will enable us to survive.
It's the same spiral, but you have that at a societal level. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very.
So once again, they're in. So you have the tradition of being in the desert, being slaves in Egypt. You have the tradition of the slaves in Egypt, and then now they're actually slaves to the Babylonian Empire. And then they have to go for some period of time. They have to go be slaves for some period of time before, I think it's Persians under Cyrus the Great. I could be wrong about that. Persians conquer Babylonians. Then the king of Persia is like he basically said to the Jewish people, he's like, go back and rebuild. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, I remembered it. So it's really it's the acceptance of the suffering,
Yeah.
because they want to go back, and I was saying how we always end up going back into our sins and stuff. I don't know about you, but it's like it's like but ultimately they don't, right? They persist in their suffering,
Well,
and
they,
they're given kind of the ability to split, like the seas, and like that's when God is working with them, or something.
you have unification and suffering, and then you have a slow but steady scattering that inevitably occurs, or a deterioration, because by the time of Jesus you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and you got these guys, the zealots that just want to kill every Roman, and so you got all these factions by the time of Jesus. So there is a slow and steady fractioning that occurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a connection in terms of, the matrix and leaving the matrix, but it gets a little bit more complicated, when trying to compare the story of Exodus to a modern film.
But it is the cyclical nature, and it's in history too, of like, you have the unification through hardship, through suffering, and then you have this slow and steady scattering. I see that just in recent history. The closest example was 9/11. Like, 9/11 unified us, unlike anything that has happened in my lifetime. And then so COVID, for like the first 2 months of COVID, we were unified. We were like, yeah, healthcare heroes, da 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 da, and
This is their method, introduce the enemy, this is the yeah.
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 Maybe this is a good place to wrap things up. Maybe we've been going, I think, for a couple hours.
Yeah, we could.
But
Has it really been? How long has it been?
It's been like 2 hours. But yeah,
Nice.
I should
Yeah, sure.
check on my mother. But there's like 10 other topics that we could talk about in the future. So I'll just mention them. So we could talk about one thing I've been thinking a lot about is like evolutionary pops, you could say, where like there's a sudden evolutionary jump. And I don't even mean biologically, but you can think of it that way. But I think we're in one of those evolutionary pops
Maybe teleological, perhaps.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I'll explain what I mean by a pop. It's like a sudden, like the closest example in human history is the agricultural revolution that was about 12,000 years ago, when humans had to move from a primarily hunting and hunter-gatherer diet to agricultural diets. And that, from what I understand of the best scientific literature on the subject, is that evolution was very fast, human evolution during that time. Meaning, and when I say evolution, I don't mean like humans were like dramatically different people, but I mean like if there were some traits within a human population that made it more, that they were more easily able to digest bread, then those people did better health-wise and everything, as you know, the society moved to agriculture. And that happened like across most of the world in a very short time frame, that agriculture spread. And not just bread, but like, you know, other grains and things like that, and things that were cultivated. But I think we're in a similar evolutionary jump now when it comes to things like religion and faith and
new ability to digest bread, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, because we had
True
different
bread, the bread
species.
of
We
life.
had I don't want to go to, but we had all these different species of faith that were separated ethnically, typically. So you had like Dutch, you had, you know, Scottish Presbyterians, Dutch CRC, you had German Lutherans, you had you know, all these Greek Orthodox, and you had all these ethnically diverse religious groups, but the faith was mostly in like burning the wooden shoes sort of thing. And now what's happening is like all those ideas are mixing, and we're sorting into populations based on our natural proclivities versus so instead of where we were born, it's now based on I'm personally more attracted to the traditional faith, and so I'm moving to Orthodox, or I'm moving to a trad Catholic, or I'm more of like a in the spirit type person, and I need to go to the Pentecostal church because, and that's happening subconsciously. It's like we're drawn to what we're attracted to. But there's this sorting that's happening right now because of like the great flattening in terms of information and options, quite frankly. Like it's basically Go ahead.
I can't help but mention how this really fits with Steiner's way of thinking about the evolution of consciousness and the Christ impulse being the, you know, the human being and the I, he, you know, like the I capital, such that now that, you know, Christ represents this turning point in the evolution of humanity, talking about the I in relation to the spiritual world, and how now it's about communities organizing around the I in relation to the spiritual world rather than these lower members. So basically, it's no longer about, you know, biological, you know, kinship and stuff like that. It's more about
the I. So this is out of the unique spiritual individuality of each one of us, and we need to be able to I meet I. And so this is not it's not a group think. And in fact, she would be, or the anthropops would be similar to Jung in saying that at this time, if you were to go back into that group mentality, it's actually regressive.
Right.
And a lot of people are tempted to do it because of fear.
And yeah, I would call it, like, from my perspective, you know, I think one of the ways I've described it is just the organization around affinity groups, you know, that we have a common love, and that I seeks I and I recognizes I because of the fact that we have a common love in this. We have common values set. My guy Swedenborg would talk about it as heavenly communities, you know, that we're called to build these communities that are around these heavenly loves, these loves for the good, the good, the true, and the beautiful. I think is that.
Yeah. That's Plato.
Yeah. But that idea of kind of continuing to come back to that, and that was, you know, and that so struck me because When this whole thing kicked off,
whoever does the will of my father is my brother and sister and my mother. Yeah.
And yeah, also this connects with my personal thoughts in terms of I think that, the evolution, I think the right relationship with Lucifer, I think the most powerful technology, you know, I'm, there's a strong competition between language and medicine in a way. And in a way, I don't know if I even want to phrase it like that, but, like I think, we're really seeing the Luciferic in terms of how it's operating in evolutionary history in terms of medicine.
Is it any different than it was, say, with the alchemists and the
I
astrologists
think so.
trying to read, basically trying to use the environment to get what they want in the future?
Hmm.
Isn't that the
Well,
same
but now
impulse?
but the thing is that now we have like nukes and mRNA,
Yeah.
and this is crazy. And so that's a big thing. But I also think that in terms of language, there's an evolution of language going on. I think, in my opinion, where it's becoming more right-brained, less propositional, more resonance-based, embodied, face-to-face, and rhythmic. Yeah.
In The Master's Emissary, you cited that research that the vocal cords were more developed before the language centers. So the very first humans communicated mostly through song, basically, that there was this kind of Eden state where there was this harmonic vocalization of somewhat sapient, bipedal creatures who were basically singing together before they were speaking, and that the function of language, to be denotative and descriptive, piggybacked on the use of the vocal cords for basically harmony.
Yes.
So the point is both that we misunderstand theoretically the function of language, thinking that its primary function is denotative and descriptive, when in fact there's a deeper function, which is the resonance it allows for between us. And what's interesting, like as someone who's done some clinical work, when you listen to someone speak, you're often not listening to what they say, you're listening to the tone and tenor and anxiety or absence of anxiety and the prosody and the pace of their speech and all the musical tones, basically, not the content. And in fact, the mismatch between content and that underlying musicality is a sign to pay attention to. So it's just interesting to think that, in fact, something as basic as language, the hemispheres are allowing us to misunderstand subtly.
Like I told you, this image of the New Jerusalem, for example, is this image of how even our technologies, even our kind of technical understanding could be transformed and could participate in this massive, let's say, this filling up of the world with meaning. But until there is a awakening and people come together and see the big picture, then I'm sad to say that I think that our technologies, although they can be helpful, that they're the ones who are going to also bring us into into darkness, you could say. When you think of technology, like, you have to be careful. It just means these external means.
And
do you think so? Random question. I wrote this down earlier because we started with this, but do you think that, so we were talking about, like, since the 60s, people have, let's say, become more open-minded to a number of things since the boomer generation. Do you think that, I'm curious if they've done big five studies across time, and especially in the Western world. Well, I guess I'm curious of two things. Do you think the Western world trait openness is higher than the rest of the world because of, let's say, the cultural seeds that we, or the cultural environment that we live in? And then B, I would ask the question, like, in the Western world, if you took a slice of the population, so let's say you took age 14 to 24 year olds, or like 14 to 25 or something like that, like young adults, and you measured them in like 1930 in terms of the big five, and then you took that same slice of the population and measured them today in terms of the big five, I wonder how they would differ across those 80 or 90 years. Because I
Yeah.
would wager that, like, as a general population, so I'd wager two things. We could talk about this maybe next time.
Sure.
But I would wager the trait neuroticism, so the N in ocean, is like on average is probably way higher
Mhm.
today than it was 80 or 90 years ago. And I would wager that openness is also like way higher today
Mhm.
on average than 80 or 90 years ago. Um, that
Mm.
yeah, just a guess. If the same questions were asked that are measuring those things.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think probably the same thing. It gets a little tricky with children, but yeah, I think probably the same. It would, I think similarly, and also, uh, I think yes, I do think that the psychedelics contributed to like a cultural shift towards
Yes.
more openness. You know, however, I also think that this can be one thing to be clear about psychedelics is that I see a danger in them of parasitic divergence, which is that, you know, they give you this ability to be open, then you're also suggestible to bad ideas. And but even more so than that, just having too much openness in general, like if I think about tripping as like a very luciferic, it's about, you know, going outside the tradition. It's like encountering the new and the futuristic and stuff. Um, and it's like, you know, openness eventually leads to like, you know, uh, like transhumanism is like a danger, and also like wokeness, and you know, wokeness is like too much openness in a way, right? And
That's
would you agree with
interesting.
that?
But well,
I'm just
maybe
saying, all that I'm trying to say
oh,
here,
okay,
all
okay.
that
No,
I'm
no, no,
trying
no,
to
no.
say here is
So
that
no, well,
I think
I
that
think
the
it's
psychedelic, wait, all that I'm
yeah,
trying to
okay,
say here
okay.
is that the openness was, I think, either subverted or taken too far,
Mm.
you know, by maybe powers outside of the plant medicines.
So
You know?
I've seen this as my daughter grows older, is that it becomes easier for her to be afraid the older she gets, in that the more she's aware of like the dangers, like the more she's aware of things that are like possible that are dangerous, the easier it is to be afraid. And I think of like I th- I think most of I think you're right that there's a tie between uh openness and wokeness. And I think it's as the world has grown so open, that there's so much, that there's so I think it goes back to that instinct to it's what I was talking about, which is the flight from vulnerability. It's like, okay, how can I push button be less vulnerable? Like, and so what I mean by vulnerability, you could even think about it in terms of a frame vulnerability. So like if someone says an idea that could potentially hurt my frame or change the way I think, or it you got to think of vulnerability more than just physically. You got to think about it in terms of the totality of your psyche, like the totality of the person.
Mhm.
So if you're if what you're really afraid of is losing something within yourself or of yourself, then a really good defense against that is to be part of a group that assures your identity. Whatever your identity is, that group is like, yes, that's you. Like that is anti-fragile, because it's saying, yep, that's you. So you basically create a tribe, you create a environment around yourself that it gives you the defense, gives you the clothes, gives you the protection to say, yep, I am this, I am this, I am this. And so then anything that kind of goes against that, or seeks to change anything that
Yeah.
threatens the existing paradigm, becomes, well, it's a threat. It's on the outside, so it creates this inside outside dynamic, which is protection on the inside, that preserves, you could almost say, like, preserves a childlike state of, because it's the exact opposite of like being willing to be changed by God, per se. Like
Mhm.
like when you say, like, I don't know, like the and
Yeah.
allow God to, yeah, sorry,
No, yeah, I
go ahead.
think that's great. And I think maybe it's kind of the, like, it's almost the idea of a balance between having an open and closed circle. Like generally it's like, you know, you create the closed system, and you create the maze, even you get lost in the world, like or even just a closed community. But then also the circle is open, psychedelic communion with God happens, and then there's transformation and change, right?
Well,
And
I haven't seen.
however,
Oh,
you
sorry.
can't,
Go ahead.
if you go too far in that respect, then you end up with crazy wokeness and like, you know, um, just like persistent delusions. An overwhelm is what I mean, like if it's too much openness. And also, as I said, I don't think that's all just at the hands of the psychedelics. I think it's, there's also cultural agents trying to pull the strings in terms of globalism and wokeness and stuff like that.
Interesting.
But yeah, no, I think that's correct in the way that you put it.
Being willing to be changed by God.
I don't know if, yeah, the idea of openness can be, no good. But yeah, there's this. I definitely think that there's cultural changes happening, and like, yeah, and it's about finding a right relationship with the Luciferic, in my opinion, as such. And what does that look like? It's about seeing it in its proper, what God intended for it, the purpose of it, and what that is it's this updating, um, changing technological type of thing, and it's just a matter of finding the balance.
Every time you say Luciferic, I'm training my mind to think of that as what's on the outside.
Yeah,
Because if
I
I can,
think that's the way
yeah,
that Galahad uses it, if I remember. But
yeah, because you're right
yeah.
that you need to have a relationship with what's on the outside.
Mhm.
And because if you don't have a relationship with what's on the outside, that's totalitarian. That's what totalitarianism is.
Mhm.
It means there are no
Yeah, and that's archons. That's on the other side. We've been talking a lot about Lucifer, but the other side is Yaldabaoth, who is like this idea of the demiurge, who is like creates a system that is like
self-enclosed.
yeah, and just like
The
and
video game.
yeah, as I said earlier, I think
Interesting.
about the closed circle as a negative synthesis in a way, but the idea of the archonic is like these overlords who never allow change. It's like we have a totalizing, it's totalitarianism or something. I don't
So is
know. I don't know.
wokeness
I think
the
I'm,
same is wokeness the same instinct of video games, but taken to its logical extreme, which is project instead of me projecting myself into the artificial world, I am projecting the video game out into the real world. And
that might be too much to tackle in this one. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna watch it back though, and I hope to continue the conversation soon, man. Because I think this is really, it's so good talking with you. We're touching on like deep theological stuff, but it's not, it's lighthearted and it's interesting. It's really
yeah,
great, man.
I
So
love it.
cool,
No, it's always so much fun talking to you, Jonathan. So hope
cool,
we do it
man.
again. Yeah,
Yeah,
it sounds like we got a bunch of things we
yeah,
could
I
drill
agree.
down. Yeah,
Cool.
cool.
Yeah, I'll try and have this up soon.
Awesome.
All
Wow,
right, bro.
great.